The catwalk over the pit was slick with rust and old fear, and the two guards marching Sam Rays toward its edge did not once look down into the dark below them. They kept their crested heads level and their prod poles high, and the taller of the two hummed a low three-note pattern under his breath, the way a Valkyrie hummed when it did not want to think about what it was doing. Sam looked down. He couldn't help it. The pit was a shaft cut into the moon's black rock, 40 feet across, its walls sheeted in scarred steel that no claw had ever climbed. Far below, past the reach of the sodium lamps, something moved. Not fast. Slow and heavy and patient, a shape that pushed the shadows aside the way a barge pushes water. "It's already awake," Sam said. His voice came out even. He had decided, somewhere back in the holding cage, that whatever else happened tonight he was not going to give the crested things the pleasure of hearing him break. You could at least feed it first. Then it wouldn't have to work so hard. The taller guard's hum stopped. Quiet dead flesh. "Just saying." Sam rolled his shoulders under the ration sack tunic they'd let him keep. His wrists were bound in front of him with a mag cuff that would pop open the instant he crossed the pit's threshold field. The Valkyrie liked their kills mobile, so the crowd could watch a thing run before it stopped running. "You march a lot of us up here." The shorter guard made a wet clicking sound in his throat that might have been a laugh. "You are the 9th this cycle. And the beast is still hungry." Sam nodded slowly, as if this were a business figure he was turning over. "Bad math, that. 9 meals and it hasn't calmed down once, almost like it doesn't want to be here either." The taller guard shoved him hard between the shoulder blades, and Sam's boots skidded on the rust, and for one white instant the whole black drop of the pit yawned up at him. Then the mag cuff caught on the guard's belt tether and jerked him back from the lip. He was breathing hard. He hated that. He made himself stop. Above them, ringing the top of the shaft, the gallery was filling. That was the part Sam hadn't expected, that dying down here was a thing you did in front of an audience. Valkyrie leaned on the rail 3 deep, their scaled faces lit green and gold from the ore lamps set into the rock, their throat crests flushed dark with the particular excitement of a species that had run this moon for 200 years and had never once been the prey. Overseers in gray, off-shift miners in slag-stained coveralls, the ones who worked the deep galleries and came up filthy and wanting to see something worse off than themselves. And near the back, on a raised iron balcony that jutted out over the drop like a box at a theater, stood the one they all kept glancing at. Overseer Voral Cass Rand Blacklung reached the way a man runs a thing he privately hates and publicly adores. He was old for a Valkyrie, his crest gone the pale yellow of long command, and he wore the gray coat of the syndicate with a collar so stiff it held his jaw at a permanent upward tilt. He had a way of standing very still and letting the room orient itself around his stillness. When he lifted one clawed hand, the murmur of the gallery folded shut like a book. "Debt-conscript," Cass said. His voice carried without effort. The pit's acoustics had been cut to carry a voice from the balcony to the floor. "Rays, 3rd gallery, you struck a foreman." "I stopped a foreman," Sam said. "From caving in a kid's skull with a shock mallet. There's paperwork on it if your species does paperwork." A ripple went through the gallery, not sympathy, Sam understood. Appetite. They liked that the meat talked back. It made the ending taste better. "The foreman," Cass went on, unbothered, "is worth 400 labor cycles to this operation. You are worth 91 and falling. When a man's ledger runs backward, the ledger is closed." He turned his pale head a fraction, and the sodium light caught the wet black of his eyes. "We do not waste closure at Blacklung. We make it useful, instructional." "Real generous of you." "Down there," Cass said, "is a creature your people would call an apex. We took it from the far side, from the dark hemisphere out past the ice, where the sun never touches and the things that live have never learned to fear anything above them. 8 of your kind have gone into that pit this cycle." He let that sit. "None have needed to be removed. It is very tidy, Rays. You will barely feel the tidiness." Down in the dark, the heavy shape had stopped moving. Sam felt it more than saw it, a sense of a huge attention turning upward, the way you feel a stranger's stare on the back of your neck in a crowd. The gallery felt it too. The murmur thinned. "Any last noise?" Cass asked. "They usually have some." Sam looked at the crested faces packed along the rail, hundreds of them, lit up and leaning in and wanting. He looked at the gray old overseer with his chin propped on his collar. And then, because it was the only thing left that was his, he looked down into the pit at the thing that was going to kill him, and he decided, the way you decide to plant your feet on a bad slope, that he would meet it standing up. "Nah," he said, "I'm good." Cass flicked 2 claws. The floor of the catwalk dropped out from under Sam's boots. He did not scream on the way down, and afterward that was the first thing the gallery talked about. He fell maybe 15 feet before the deceleration field caught him. The Valkyrie didn't want their meat breaking its neck on the drop and cheating the beast, and it set him down on the pit floor hard but whole, driving the air out of him, popping the mag cuff off his wrists with a spit of blue sparks. He rolled onto his side in a foot of gritty, sour-smelling sand, and lay there for a second getting his lungs back. The pit floor was warmer than the catwalk had been. Body warm. That registered even before the rest of it, the animal fact of a large living thing having lain here, breathing, for a long time. He got his hands under him and pushed up to a crouch and looked. It was close. It had crossed the whole floor while he fell, silent, and now it stood 8 feet away with its head lowered, and it was so much bigger than the shadow had promised that his body tried to run before his mind had a plan, and he clamped down on that hard, because running was how the sand around him had gotten so worn. The thing was the size of a loading sled. Slate gray, hide-gone leather hard and cracked at the joints, with heavy overlapping plates of something that was neither bone nor shell sheeting its shoulders and the ridge of its spine, where a mane of dark quills lay flattened back. 4 legs, thick as pilings, the forelimbs heavier than the hind, built for pinning weight. A broad, low head flat across the crown, and a mouth that when it breathed showed a double row of teeth the color of old ivory, each as long as Sam's thumb. One eye was a deep amber, ringed and clear. The other was scarred to a milky ruin, and the burn that had done it ran back along the cheek in a shiny keloid seam. And around its neck, half buried in the muscle, sat a band of black syndicate steel, a control collar, and the flesh around it was swollen and shining and wrong. Sam's stomach turned over. He'd seen wounds like that on the deep gallery draft animals, where a harness had been left on too long and the meat grew up around it. It didn't heal. It just got worse, quietly, forever. The beast breathed at him. A long, low bellows sound, in and out, and he could smell it, carrion and hot iron and something underneath that was almost clean, almost like wet stone after rain. "Okay," Sam said, quiet. He stayed in his crouch. "Okay, hey." Every instinct he had was screaming to make himself big, to shout, to grab the one rock near his hand and swing. He had watched men do exactly that in the holding cages, rehearsing it, promising each other they'd go down fighting. He looked at the worn sand, at the shape of the worn sand, the arcs and skids of it, and he understood in a cold, flat rush what those arcs were. They were the shapes men made when they ran, and when they swung, and when they were driven into the corner and fought. He didn't do any of that. He stayed low, and he kept his hands where the good amber eye could see them, open and empty, and he did not look straight into that eye but a little to the side of it, the way you looked at a spooked dog. And he kept his voice going, low and level, saying nothing words, the way you'd talk to settle a horse you'd never met in a barn that was on fire. "Easy," he said, "easy now. I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you, looks like. We're both stuck in this hole, huh? Look at that collar. Somebody did that to you. That's a hell of a thing. That's a hell of a thing they did." The beast's ruined head came forward, slow. The huge nostrils flared and worked, hunting the shape of him in the air. Sam felt hot breath wash over his hands, his throat. His whole skin drew up tight. He held still. He kept talking. Yeah, smell all you want. Nothing on me worth the trouble. 91 labor cycles and dropping, the man says. I'm the cheap meat. You could do better. The nostrils worked. The bellows breath went in and held. Up on the balcony, Vorelcast leaned forward with his claws on the iron rail, and beside him the murmur of the gallery had gone entirely silent, because the beast that had opened 8 men in 8 seconds was standing over the 9th with its head down and its jaws closed, breathing him in like a question. And then the huge gray head turned, not toward Sam, away from him, swinging to face the sealed gate at the base of the shaft, the gate through which the shock handlers came, and the beast's ruined lip peeled up off those ivory teeth, and out of its chest came a sound that Sam felt in the bones of his feet, a low grinding subsonic thing that rattled grit up off the floor. It had put its bulk between Sam and the gate. Sam sat down slowly in the warm sand behind the great armored shoulder, because his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him, and he laughed once, short and disbelieving, and pressed the heel of his hand against his mouth to stop it. Huh, he said into his palm. Okay then. Dr. Adept, yes. Loran had catalogued the specimen for 11 cycles, and had never once been afraid of it until this moment, watching it not kill. She stood at the observation slit 2 levels down, where the handlers ran the pit, and her data slate hung forgotten in her 4 fingers. On the feed, the human, small, soft, pink, absurd sat with its back against the specimen's foreleg like a pup against its dam, and the specimen had angled its whole body to shield the creature, and it was warning the gate. Warning the gate, warning her. Run it again, she said. Handler Voss pushed the feed back. They watched the drop, the roll, the crouch. They watched the human keep low and turn its face aside and hold up its empty hands. They watched it talk. There was no audio on the pit floor, cast like the gallery's guesswork better than transcripts, but you could see the jaw move, slow and steady, never stopping. Every other subject stood up, Voss said. His crest had gone the gray of unease. Stood up or ran or reached for a weapon, predator response. The specimen reads the vertical rise as a challenge, the run as flight prey, the reach as a strike. It's clean instinct. We modeled it. This one stayed down, Yes said. This one stayed down. She had spent 11 cycles proving that the specimen could not be handled. It was her professional position, printed under her name in the syndicate's husbandry ledger. Subject exhibits no bond plasticity, non-domesticable, recommend disposal use only. She had won 2 grade raises off that finding. She had built the pit protocols on it. The whole instructional value of the thing, Cass's tidy, useful closure, rested on the certainty that it could not be reached, that it was a wall of appetite with a wound where a mind should be. On the feed, the human reached up, slow, and laid one bare hand flat against the armored shoulder above it. And the specimen, which had shattered a reinforced handling arm and cost the operation a technician's 4 fingers, did not so much as flick a quill. Get me Overseer Cass, Yes said. Her voice did not sound like her own. And do not send handlers into that pit, whatever he orders. Do not open that gate. Voss looked at her. He'll want it removed. The human, tonight it defeats the whole. I know what it defeats. She was already moving toward the lift. That's the problem. They left Sam in the pit overnight, which he had not expected. He'd expected the gate to grind open and the handlers to come in with their prods and their nets and drag the situation back into a shape that made sense to them. Instead, the lamps dimmed to a low red gallery light, and the crowd thinned and left, and the balcony emptied. And after a while there was nothing but Sam Rays and the specimen and the vast breathing dark of a shaft cut into a moon. He didn't sleep at first. You didn't sleep the first night next to a thing that could fold you in half. But the beast lay down carefully, joint by joint, with the stiffness of an old laborer, and it lay with its scarred face toward the gate and its warm armored flank toward Sam. And after an hour of that Sam found he had stopped shaking. And after another hour, without deciding to, He had leaned his back against that flank, and it rose and fell under him, in and out, slow as a tide, and the warmth came off it like a banked stove. "Duke," he said, at some point, to the dark. He didn't know where the name came from. There'd been a dog on the homestead where he'd grown up, a great ugly gray working dog that hated everyone and slept across the barn door, and would let a 3-year-old ride him like a pony, and take the hand off anyone who reached for the tack without leave. His grandmother had called that dog the meanest gentle animal on the moon they'd been dumped on, and she'd loved him past all sense. And when the syndicate reclaimed the homestead for arrears, the dog had stood in the yard and would not move, and Sam had never let himself think about what came after that. "Duke," he said again. The beast's ear, a ragged flap of leather, swiveled back toward the sound and held there. "Yeah, you look like a duke. You've got his whole attitude." The scarred head lifted a few inches and turned, and the good amber eye found him in the red dark, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at each other, the human and the thing that hadn't killed him. Then the head went back down, angled at the gate, on watch, and the bellow's breath went slow again. Sam looked at the collar. Even in the red light he could see how the flesh had swallowed it, how it pulled and wept where the beast's neck moved. It had been on there for years. It was the kind of wound that would sour the temper of anything alive, a constant grinding wrongness that never let up. And he thought about 8 men going down into this pit, and standing up tall and shouting, and he thought that maybe the beast hadn't been killing them so much as answering them, the only way a thing in that much pain knew how to answer. "Tomorrow," Sam told it very quietly, "if they don't kill us both, I'm going to try and get that thing off you. You're not going to like it. I need you to not eat me while I do it. Deal?" The beast breathed. "Deal," Sam said, and closed his eyes, and because the body takes what it can get, and the flank at his back was warm, and the huge slow breath was the first steady thing in his world in longer than he could remember, he slept. Above, in the husbandry level, yes, Loran did not sleep either. She sat before the low-light feed and watched the human lean into the specimen and go still, and she watched the specimen let it, and she reached out with one careful finger and touched the place on the screen where the black collar had disappeared into the meat of the thing's neck. She had signed the order for that collar, 11 cycles ago, non-domesticable, recommend disposal use only. For the first time in her professional life, Dr. Adept, yes, Loran began, very quietly, to be afraid that she had been wrong about something, and that a great many people were about to learn it in a very public way. Morning at Blacklung was a matter of policy rather than light. There was no sun on this face of the moon worth the name. The day came when the lamps brightened and the shift horn sounded through the rock, and it was by that horn that Sam woke, stiff and cold-jointed, and for one merciful second, without any memory of where he was. Then the flank at his back rose and fell, and it all came home. He was alive. That was the astonishing fact he had to hold in both hands. He was alive, and the specimen was awake, and it had rolled up onto its haunches and was watching the gate, and along its neck the swollen flesh around the collar had wept in the night and crusted, and it looked worse in the lamplight than it had in the dark. "All right," Sam said. His voice was a croak. He worked some spit into his mouth. "All right, let's see about that." He got up slowly, all his movements slow, telegraphed, nothing sudden. The specimen's good eye tracked him, but the great body stayed loose. Sam went first to the water. There was a trickle spigot low in the wall, syndicate mean, the kind that gave you a mouthful at a time to keep the meat from dying of thirst before the beast got to it, and he drank. And then he cupped his hands under it and carried a double palmful back and crouched near the beast's head and held it out. The beast looked at the water. It looked at Sam. Then it dropped its huge scarred muzzle and lapped, and its tongue was rough as a rasp against his palms, and it took the water and then leaned its head into his hands for a moment, the whole terrible weight of that skull, and Sam braced and held it and felt something in his chest come apart quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I know. Nobody's done that in a while, huh?" He made the water trip 4 more times, until the beast stopped drinking. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the collar, and he made himself think it through like a job, because it was a job, and jobs he could do. The band was black steel, thumb-thick, and it had a seam and a housing where a lock plate sat. Years ago it had ridden loose around the neck. Now the neck had grown into it, muscle bulging up on either side, the metal buried a full finger width into swollen flesh at the back where the beast couldn't reach to worry it. He couldn't pull it off. He couldn't cut it. He had nothing to cut with. But the housing, the lock plate, that was a mechanism, and mechanisms Sam had been taking apart since he was old enough to hold a driver. Every conscript on this moon could strip a mag cuff or a prod battery blind. The syndicate ran on cheap hardware and cheaper hands. "I'm going to touch your neck," he told the beast. "Right at the back. It's going to hurt worse before it stops. I need you to hold." He didn't know if it understood the words. He was fairly sure it understood something, the tone, the intent, the fact that the small warm thing meant to put its hands where the pain lived. He came around slow, keeping one hand always in contact with the hide so the beast always knew where he was, the way you kept a hand on a nervy animal moving behind it. And he found the housing, buried and hot and slick, and he got his fingers into the crusted swelling around it, and the beast went rigid. The subsonic grind started up in its chest. Its head came around, jaws parting, and for one heartbeat Sam was looking straight down that double row of ivory teeth from a foot away, close enough to count them, close enough to die. "Easy," Sam said. He did not pull his hands back. That was the whole thing right there, the only card he had, that he did not pull his hands back. "Easy, Duke, I've got you, I know. Hold for me, hold." The jaws hung open beside his face. The grind rose, and then slow, shuddering, a thing that cost it something Sam would never be able to measure. The great head turned away again, and the jaws closed, and the beast fixed its good eye on the gate and held itself still, and let the small warm hands hurt it. Sam worked fast after that. He found the lock plate by feel, cleared the crust off the housing with his thumbnail, found the release detent that any syndicate hardware had because syndicate hardware was built to be serviced cheap. It was fused with corrosion. He worked it and worked it, whispering the whole time, "Easy, easy, hold, good," and the beast trembled under his hands like a wall in an earthquake and did not turn, and at last the detent gave with a gritty click and the housing sprang its seam. The band didn't fall off. It couldn't, the flesh held it. But it opened, the tension came off. The buried steel loosened in the swollen meat by a crucial finger width, and a foul gush of matter ran hot over Sam's hands and down the beast's shoulder, and the whole animal shuddered from nose to tail, and made a sound Sam had never heard anything make. A long, broken, descending groan that was pure relief, that was years of it, coming out all at once. "There," Sam breathed. "There, that's it, got the pressure off. Rest of it we do slow." He was crying, he noticed distantly, and didn't care. "Look at you, you've been carrying that the whole time, the whole time. And they call you the monster." He washed the wound as best he could with palmfuls from the mean little spigot, and he packed the loosened space with a strip torn from his tunic. And the beast let him do all of it, standing with its head hung low and its flanks heaving. Docile now with the particular exhausted docility of an animal whose pain has just been halved by another creature's hands. When he was done, he sat down in the sand with his back against its foreleg and his fouled hands hanging over his knees, spent. And the beast folded down around him, deliberately, arranging its bulk into a curl with the human inside it, and the scarred face pointed out at the gate. And Sam understood that whatever he had done, it was finished now. It could not be undone. He belonged to this thing and it to him. "You know what?" he told the ceiling of the pit, 40 feet up, where the gallery would gather again by nightfall to watch him die. "I don't think tonight's going to go how they planned. They tried to take him out quietly first, before the gallery ever gathered, and that was the mistake that taught the whole husbandry level exactly what they were dealing with. It was mid-shift, the pit empty of witnesses, when the upper hatch ground opened 40 feet overhead, and the handling arm came down, a long articulated boom of syndicate steel with a grapple net at its end. Rated, the manifest said, for 6 times the specimen's body weight, the same class of machine that had once cost a technician 4 fingers, and that, yes, Loran had personally certified as the only safe way to move the animal. The plan was simple and bloodless and deniable. Snare the human, haul it up through the hatch, and close the ledger somewhere the galleries could make no story of it. A malfunction, a transfer gone wrong. No pit, no spectacle, no legend. Sam heard the hatch and looked up and saw the net coming down out of the light, and he did the only thing there was time to do, which was nothing. He stood still in the open and let it come, because there was nowhere to run in a 40-foot steel shaft, and he knew it. He did not have to run. The specimen came off the floor between him and the descending net the way weather comes off a mountain, fast and total, and without any warning at all. And Sam did not watch what happened to the handling arm any more than he had watched what happened in the water, because he had made himself that promise. But he heard it, the shriek of stressed steel, the crack of a boom rated for 6 times the specimen's weight, discovering that the rating had never once accounted for the specimen having something to protect. And when he looked up again, the grapple net was a torn ruin of cable dangling from a boom that had been bent back on itself like wet wire, and the whole arm was withdrawing up through the hatch in a series of jerks that Sam recognized from a lifetime around machines and the men who ran them, as the movements of an operator who has stopped trying to finish a job and started trying only to save his equipment. The hatch ground shut. Sam let out a breath and put his hand on the great heaving gray shoulder, and the specimen turned its scarred head and pressed once into his palm, and then swung back to face the closed hatch on watch, its mane still up. 6 times its body weight, Sam said, quiet, almost to himself, looking at the shredded cable. You bent it like a spoon. He rubbed the shoulder. They keep thinking you're an animal in a trap. They haven't figured out yet you're not trapped. You're just waiting. 2 levels up. Yes, Loran stood at the observation slit with her data slate forgotten in her hand, and watched the operator's feed replay the ruin of a machine she had certified. And she understood, with a cold clarity that would not let her sleep that night, that there was no piece of equipment in the entire husbandry inventory that would take the human out of that pit against the specimen's will. Not the arm, not the nets. Nothing they owned was rated for a predator that had stopped calculating its own survival and started calculating someone else's. She had written the specifications herself. She had never once, in 11 cycles, needed a specification for love. She was still standing there when the summons came up from the balcony. The overseer wanted the husbandry assessment, in person, immediately, and he was already speaking in that quiet balcony voice about the second gate. Overseer Vorelcast did not, as a rule, come down to the husbandry levels. The husbandry levels smelled of the specimens and of Dr. Adept Loran's endless caution, and Cass preferred the balcony, where the air was cut clean and a man could think. But the feed she'd flagged had pulled him out of his rest cycle, and now he stood in the low room with his stiff collar, holding his chin up, and watched the loop of the human touching the specimen's neck, and his crest was flushed a dark, dangerous plum. You woke me, he said, to show me the meat is still alive. I woke you, Yes said carefully, because the specimen is exhibiting bond behavior that my findings said was impossible. It is protecting the human. It is grooming to the human's touch. Overseer, it let the human handle the control collar. It has never let anything near that collar. Then the meat has a gift. Charming. Cass turned from the feed. Open the gate. Send the handlers. Remove the human, and if the specimen objects, prod it back and we do the removal from the upper hatch with the nets. Then tomorrow we drop the next one and the pit works as it has always worked. Yes did not move to the gate controls. Cass looked at her. Overseer, she said, if you send handlers into that pit while the specimen is in a protective posture, you will lose them. Not one, all of them. It broke a handling arm rated for 6 times its body weight. It has spent 11 cycles wanting to kill something it was permitted to reach, and now it has something to defend, which is worse, because a predator defending is not calculating survival. It is. She stopped, searching for the word in his language and not finding it kind. It is beyond price. It will spend itself completely. You will trade good handlers for a corpse you could simply leave in the hole. Then we do not leave it in the hole. Cass's voice went quiet, which was when it was worst. Dr. Adept, you have spent 11 cycles and a considerable budget assuring this operation that the specimen cannot be tamed. That was the whole of its value. An untamable apex is a spectacle. A tameable one is a liability, a mouth to feed, a thing that can be turned. Do you understand what you are telling me? You are telling me the gallery watched last night as a piece of dead flesh worth 91 cycles walked into your untamable apex and made a friend of it in front of 400 witnesses. Yes was silent. The story is already in the deep galleries, Cass said. By the shift horn it will be in every gallery, the human who the pit would not kill. Do you know what that is, Dr. Adept? In an operation that runs on 11,000 debt-conscripts who outnumber my guards 40 to 1 and stay in their cages only because they believe the syndicate cannot be beaten. He let the question hang. It is a spark, and you have handed it a very great deal of dry timber. For the first time, yes, understood that this was not about the specimen at all. It had never been about the specimen. It was about the 11,000. What do you want to do? She said. It was not really a question. I want the story to end the correct way, Cass said. Publicly, tonight, the gallery gathers as it always does. And they watch the human die as it always does, because if the pit can be survived, then Blacklung can be survived, and I will not have that thought in 11,000 heads. He moved toward the lift. You said handlers can't take it. Fine, we won't send handlers. We'll send the pit something even it can't defend against. Ready the second gate. Yes, his stomach dropped. The second gate holds the pack hunters. Overseer, you can't loose those against the specimen with a human on the floor. The human will be. The human will be dead, Cass said, which is the entire point. Ready the second gate. He stepped into the lift. And Dr. Adept, repair your findings before the syndicate audit arrives. It would be unfortunate if the ledger showed you had known, and said nothing, and let a spark walk around loose in my mind. The lift door closed on his pale, tilted, patient face. Yes stood alone in the husbandry level for a long moment. Then she looked at the feed, at the small pink human sleeping curled inside the coil of the monster she had condemned, and she did a thing she had not done in 11 cycles of loyal service. She opened a side channel on her slate, a maintenance line, an old handler's frequency that fed to a single battered speaker bolted low on the pit wall, installed years ago to test the specimen's response to sound, and never removed. She did not know, yet, that she was going to warn the human. She told herself she was only checking the channel. She was checking the channel. The speaker crackled to life an hour before the gallery gathered, and Sam, who had been dozing against the beast's flank, came fully awake at the sound of a voice speaking his language with the careful over-precision of a thing that had learned it from records. Human, raise, do not react. Do not look for the source. The gallery is not yet watching, but the handlers are. Sam kept still. His heart was going hard. He put one hand flat on the beast's shoulder, more for himself than for it. I'm listening, he said, very low, not moving his lips much. I am the husbandry adept. It does not matter who I am. Listen, in 2 hours the gallery will gather and the overseer will open the second gate. Behind the second gate are pack hunters, 6 of them, small, fast, a coordinated species we use for culling. They are not the specimen. The specimen fights alone and forward. The pack comes low and from the flanks and behind, 6 at once, and they will go for you, not it, because it cannot cover every angle at once. No single defender can. This is how the overseer intends to end you. Do you understand? Sam looked at the beast. The beast looked at the gate, the main gate. There was, he saw now, a second seam in the pit wall, narrower, that he'd taken for a repair. 6 fast things low and from behind. 1 big slow thing that fought forward. Yeah, he said. I understand him fine. Question is why you're telling me. A pause on the channel. When the voice came back, it was lower. Because I wrote the report that put that collar on its neck, and you took the collar off in a night. And I have been 11 cycles being certain of a thing, and I would like, before whatever happens tonight, to have been wrong about it out loud to one person, even if that person is about to die. A breath. There, that is why. It is not noble. Do not make it noble. Wasn't going to, Sam almost smiled. He looked around the pit, the worn sand, the mean spigot, the sealed main gate, the second seam. He looked up the sheer scarred walls to the black rim 40 feet overhead. He looked at the beast, at its loosened collar, its cleared eye, its terrible patient bulk. 6 fast things low from the flanks. Adept, before you go, this pit ever flood? Drainage sumps, anything down here move water? There is a sump grate, beneath the sand center floor. The pit is sluiced between subjects to clear it. Why? Because 6 things that come in low, Sam said slowly, working it as he spoke, the way he'd work a jammed sled hitch, have to come in across the floor. And a floor's a floor until it isn't. How much water, how fast? Another pause, longer. And when the adept spoke again, there was something new in the careful voice, something that Sam, who had spent his whole short life reading the tone under the words of people who held his ledger, recognized as the sound of a mind changing sides. The sluice dumps 40,000 liters in 90 seconds, Yessa said, from the ring header all around the base of the wall. It is on a manual valve in the handler gallery. I control the handler gallery. A beat. Human, what are you thinking? Sam put his back against the warm gray flank of the thing that had chosen him, and he looked at the second gate where 6 killers waited. And for the first time since they'd marched him up the catwalk, he felt the cold knot in his chest turn into something with edges. I'm thinking, he said, that they built us a hole with a drain in it, and they're about to send everything they've got down here to watch us drown. He rubbed the beast's shoulder once. Let's not drown. Let's make them wish they'd left that valve alone. By the time the gallery filled that night, the story had done exactly what Cass feared. It had moved through the deep galleries on the backs of the water carriers and the ore sorters, from bunk to bunk, changing shape as it went. And by the second shift, every conscript at Blacklung Reach knew that the pit had taken a man named Rays and given him back. That the beast the Valkyrie could not break had lain down for him. That there was, in the third gallery's ledger, one name the syndicate had marked for closure and failed to close. They did not have a word for it at first. Then one of the old water carriers, a stooped man who had been on the moon longer than anyone could remember, said it the way you'd say something you'd known your whole life. That the boy had spoken to it low, and it had listened, and that was the low word, the thing the crested ones had never learned because you could not learn it if you had never once in your life been afraid. The low word. It went through the galleries faster than the story itself. By nightfall, there were conscripts who had never seen Sam Rays willing to swear they'd heard him use it. None of this was visible from the balcony, where Voralcast stood in his gray coat with his chin held up by his collar and watched the gallery pack in. But he could feel it. He had run this operation for a long time, and he knew the difference between a crowd that had come to watch a killing and a crowd that had come to see whether the killing would take. Tonight's crowd leaned differently on the rail. They were quieter. They watched the pit, not each other. They're hoping, he said to no one. Down on the floor, Sam Rays stood in the center of the pit with his hand resting on the specimen's shoulder, and he did not look up at the balcony, and that too was noticed. Cass lifted his hand. The gallery hushed. 2 nights ago, he said, the pit took a foreman breaker named Rays, as it has taken every ledger this operation has closed. Some of you have heard the beast spared him. He let a thin smile touch his face. The beast did not spare him. The beast was not hungry. Tonight it will be reminded of its purpose, and so will he and so will all of you. Open the second gate. The narrow seam in the pit wall split with a grind of old gears. Sam felt the specimen change under his hand before he saw anything. The great body dropped and coiled, the loosened plates rising along its spine and the ragged ears flattened, and it swung to face the new opening, but it did not leave him. That was the thing Sam would remember. It did not charge the gate. It backed a half step until its bulk was between Sam and the dark seam, and it held there, and it made the low grinding warning in its chest. Out of the second gate came the pack. They were nothing like the specimen. Small, waist-high, no more, and lean and quick in the mottled gray-green of the deep rock, 6 of them, low-slung and long-necked, moving in a loose scatter that was not scatter at all but a net, spreading around the walls of the pit, flowing along the base of the sheer steel with a horrible fluid economy. They did not rush. They fanned. 2 went left, 2 right, 2 hung back at the gate, and their long heads swung and their nostrils worked, and Sam understood the adept had told him true. They weren't looking at the specimen. They were looking at him, reading the angles, finding the seams in what one big body could cover. "Steady," Sam said low to the beast and to himself. His mouth had gone dry as the sand. "Steady, Duke, let them come to us. Center floor right here." He backed slow, drawing the beast with him, until they both stood over the faint square seam in the sand where the sump grate lay buried, and the 6 pack hunters flowed to keep pace, tightening their net, and up in the gallery 400 crested faces leaned into the rail and forgot to breathe. Sam looked at the pit wall, at the ring header running around the base of it, the fat pipe he'd taken for a conduit and now saw for what it was. He put his hand flat on the specimen's flank. He hoped the adept was watching. He had to trust that she was watching. "Now would be good," he said, not loud. "Adept. Now." For one long second nothing happened, and the lead pack hunter gathered itself to spring, its haunches bunching, its eyes locked on the soft pink thing behind the gray wall of the beast. And the ring header blew open all around the base of the pit at once. 40,000 liters of sluice water hit the floor from every point of the compass in the same instant, a white detonation of it, waist-deep in seconds and rising, roaring, filling the shaft with spray and thunder, and the shriek of the pack hunters, who were creatures of the dry, deep rock and had, Sam gambled, never in their lives stood in moving water. The net came apart. The floor they had read so perfectly was gone. There was no floor. There was only cold, black current dragging at their legs and a churn of foam and their own panic, and they broke, all 6, scrambling for the walls, for the gate, for anything that wasn't the water. Sam had already moved. The instant the header blew, he'd grabbed a fistful of the quillmane at the specimen's shoulders and swung himself up onto its back, above the flood, and the beast, which stood chest-deep and unbothered, a thing that had come from a world of black ice and dark seas, surged forward through the current like the barge it had always resembled, and it did not need to be told what to do, because a scattered, panicked, drowning pack was the oldest and simplest problem its kind had ever solved. Sam did not watch the part that came after. He had decided that too, up on the catwalk, in some part of him that had known this night was coming, that whatever the beast did in the dark and the spray to the things that had come to kill him, he would not turn it into a spectacle in his own head. He would not owe the gallery that. He kept his eyes on the second gate, on the churning far wall, on the water. He felt the great body move beneath him, felt it turn and drive and turn again, felt the sounds it made in its chest, and he kept his hand fisted in the mane and his face forward, and he let it be what it was, which was an apex predator, in its element for the first time in 11 years, defending the one creature in the universe that had ever taken its pain away. It did not take long. When the sluice cut off, yes, in the handler gallery, her hand shaking on the manual valve, watching the feed with her crest gone bone-white, the water began to drain through the sump grate in a sucking whirl, and the pit floor came back, sodden and steaming under the lamps, and the gallery, which had been screaming, went silent all at once. 2 of the pack hunters had made it back through the second gate and were gone. Of the other 4, 3 had wedged themselves into a huddle in the far corner, soaked and shuddering and small, their long heads pressed flat to the wet steel, making a thin keening sound that every hunter in the gallery recognized as submission. And the last one lay in the draining water near the center of the pit, unmoving, and Sam Rays stood over it, dripping, having slid down from the specimen's back, and he was crouched with one hand on its heaving flank. "Easy," he was saying to it. Lo, that word again that the deep galleries would swear they could hear even from 40 feet up, even over the drain. "Easy. You're done. Nobody's making you do this. You're done." The pack hunter was not dead. It was spent and stunned and half-drowned and terrified past the end of its aggression, and when Sam's hand settled on its flank it flinched, and then it went still, and then, while 400 Vakri watched and could not make themselves believe it, it turned its long head and pressed its nose into the wet sand near the human's knee, the way the specimen had, the way a thing does when it has run out of every option but surrender and found, against all its expectation. That surrender does not end in teeth. Sam stood up. He was soaked to the skin and shaking with cold and adrenaline, and behind him the specimen shook itself like a wet hound, a spray of water arcing off its silver in the lamplight, and moved up to stand at his shoulder. And in the far corner the 3 huddled pack hunters lifted their heads and watched the human the way starving animals watch the one hand that has ever held food. He looked up at the balcony then, for the first time. He found Voral Cass's pale, tilted face in the gray coat, and he did not gloat, and he did not shout, and that, the adept would think later, replaying it, was what made it unbearable for the crowd, the way the human simply looked at the overseer, tired and cold and matter-of-fact, the way you'd look at a man who'd tried something stupid and expensive and watched it fail. "You're going to run out of animals," Sam said. His voice was not loud, but the pit carried it. The pit carried everything. That was how it had been built. "Before you run out of me." The gallery made a sound, then that Blacklung Reach had never heard from it. Not a cheer. They were too afraid still to cheer. It was lower than a cheer, and it came from the packed deep gallery conscripts more than the crested off-shifts. A long exhaled rumble, a sound like a held breath finally let go, and it rolled up the shaft and broke against the balcony where the overseer stood, and Voral Cass felt it hit him, and understood, with the cold clarity of a man who has run an operation on fear for 200 years of history and 30 of his own life, that the fear had just cracked, right down the middle. In front of everyone. He turned and left the balcony without a word. That was noticed too. They could not leave Sam in the pit after that, and they did not dare take him out of it. The compromise, which was Yes Loran's, though she let a nervous junior overseer present it to Cass as his own, was to seal the pit and post a doubled guard and tell the galleries nothing, to let the story starve for lack of new fuel. It was a sound instinct, and it failed completely because the story no longer needed fuel. It had become the thing itself, the low word, the human the pit would not close. In the deep galleries, where 11,000 debt conscripts slept in stacked cages and worked the ore that made the Vakri rich, men who had not lifted their heads in years began, quietly, to lift them. In the pit, Sam sat with his back against the specimen's flank in the low red nightlight, wrapped in the specimen's warmth because he had nothing else, and he was not alone with it anymore. The 3 pack hunters had crept in from their corner one at a time over the hours, low and flinching, testing, and the specimen had let them, had watched them come with its one good eye and made no move, because Sam had put his hand on its shoulder and said, "Easy, they're cold, let them come." And now they lay in a loose huddle a body length off, 3 small gray-green shapes, watching him, and when he moved they moved, and when he settled they settled. "Look at us," Sam said. He was bone-tired and his voice had gone rough. "Look at this. 2 nights ago you'd have opened me up soon as look at me, and now I've got a whole crew." He reached out slow and let the nearest pack hunter smell his knuckles, and it did, its long neck stretched trembling to the limit, and then it eased down again. "You know what they're going to do, don't you?" he told the specimen. The old man in the gray coat, He can't just leave us down here now. Too many people watching. He's got to win or he's got nothing. Men like that, they'd rather burn the barn than let you keep one horse. The speaker on the wall crackled. Yes, his careful voice, lower than before, and something worn through it now, some professional certainty gone for good. He has requested a weapons draw from the armory, she said. Overseer's authority. 3 heavy shock lances and a rupture charge. Sam went still. A charge. A demolition charge, rated to bring down a gallery ceiling. A pause. He means to collapse the pit with you in it, with the specimen in it. He will tell the galleries it was an accident, a structural failure, and there will be no body and no beast and no story, only a hole full of rock, and in a cycle it will be as if none of it happened. Her breath came ragged over the channel. He is doing it at the next shift change when the galleries are underground and cannot gather to watch. Human. Raise. I do not think I can stop this one. The valve I could reach. The armory I cannot. Sam looked up the sheer scarred 40 feet of the pit wall to the black rim. He looked at the sealed main gate, at the narrow second gate, at the sump grate in the center of the floor where 40,000 liters had gone roaring down into the dark of the moon's guts. That drain, he said slowly, the sump, where's it go? To the sluice runs, the old drainage bores under the galleries. They flooded a section a decade ago and abandoned it. The runs feed down to the reclaimed sumps at the bottom of the mine. Why, human, the grate is a hand's-width bar spacing, nothing your size could. She stopped. He heard her stop. He heard the exact moment she followed the thought to where he'd already gone. The specimen, she said. It came from the far side, from the deep water under the ice. It swims. The drainage runs are flooded. The specimen could. How big are the bores? Sam said. Large, old machine bores, sled width. They ran cutting sleds down them once, big enough. Big enough for it. Big enough for, her careful voice broke and reformed. You would be in flooded rock in the dark holding onto an apex predator that has never in its life had a reason to keep a soft thing breathing. If it panics, if the run is blocked, if it forgets you are on its back for one. It won't forget me, Sam said. And he said it not as a hope but as the plainest fact he knew, the one fixed thing in a world that had spent his whole life proving nothing was fixed. He put his hand flat on the gray shoulder beside him, on the warm, slow rise of it, on the loosened collar and the healing seam. It won't forget me. That's the one thing in this whole hole I'm sure of. The specimen turned its scarred head and looked at him with its good amber eye, and Sam looked back, and the 3 pack hunters lifted their heads and watched them both. Adept, Sam said, when's the next shift change? The sump grate came up out of the sand with a groan, and it took Sam and the specimen both to do it, Sam heaving on a length of pack hunter gnawed bone he'd levered under the edge, the specimen setting one massive forepaw on the bar and pressing down with the patient, enormous strength of a thing built to pin bigger prey than this. The corroded bolts sheared. The grate peeled back. Beneath it a black shaft dropped away, slick-walled, and up out of it came a cold breath of dead water and old stone, and far down there was the flat glimmer of a flooded run. That's the way out, Sam said. He didn't feel it. He said it to make it true. Yes, his voice on the speaker was fast now. All the careful over-precision burned off it. The main bore runs level for 200 meters, then it doglegs down at the old cutting face. You will be underwater the whole run. There is no air pocket until the reclaimed sump. I have the drainage map. I can talk you to the turns, but only until you go under. The speaker doesn't reach the bore. A breath. Human. Once you go into that water, there is nothing I can do for you. Do you understand what I am telling you? If the specimen loses you in the dark. How long's the run? Sam said. Under how long am I holding my breath? At the specimen's speed, perhaps 90 seconds, perhaps more if it fights the current. It is a very long time to hold. It's not that long, Sam said, though it was forever. It was the longest thing he'd ever been asked to do. He looked at the 3 pack hunters who had crowded to the edge of the shaft and were looking down into it and drawing back, keening low. Deep rock creatures. They'd sooner die than go into that water, and he knew it. You 3 don't have to come, he told them, gentle. You go back up the second gate when they open it. You lie low. This isn't your fight, it never was, they just pointed you at me. One of them pressed its long head against his hip. He rested his hand on it a moment. Go on, live. Somebody should get to just live. Then he turned to the specimen, and he put both hands flat on the broad, scarred face, and he looked into the good amber eye from a hand's breadth away, close enough that his own reflection swam small and pale in it. You and me, he said. One more. I can't do this one without you. I go in that water alone, I'm dead in a minute. I know it and you know it. So I'm going to get on your back and I'm going to hold that mane, and I need you to swim like you did when you were free, out past the ice, before any of these people ever put a hand on you. Can you do that? Can you get us out? The specimen leaned its terrible weight forward into his hands, the way it had that first morning at the water, and it made a low sound in its chest that was not the warning grind, that was something rounder and quieter, a sound Sam had not heard from it before and would spend a long time afterward trying to describe and never quite manage. Then it turned to the shaft, and it did not hesitate, and it poured itself down into the black water head first with barely a splash, a thing built for exactly this. And Sam took one breath of the sour pit air, the last of it, and swung his leg over the great gray back and fisted both hands in the quill mane, and went down into the cold and the dark after the only friend he had. The water closed over him like a fist. He would not remember most of it clearly afterward. He would remember the cold, which was total, which drove the air half out of him in the first second so that the 90 seconds became 60 before he'd even begun. He would remember the dark, which was not like night. Night has stars, night has edges, but was the absolute lightless black of stone with a moon on top of it, a black with weight. He would remember the muscle moving under him, the vast machine of the specimen's body driving them forward through the flooded bore, the surge and glide of it, so much smoother in the water than it had ever been on land, an old thing made young again, made itself again. He would remember the wall skimming past his shoulder in the dark once, close enough to tear his tunic, and the specimen's body rolling to put itself between him and the rock without ever breaking stroke. He would remember the burn starting in his chest and building and becoming the whole world. And he would remember when the burn had become unbearable, when his body was screaming at him to open his mouth and breathe the water and end it, that he did not let go of the mane. That was the only thing he actually did in the whole crossing. He held on. Everything else the beast did. The dogleg came, and the run tipped down, and they went deeper, and the cold got worse, and Sam's vision, even in that blackness where there was nothing to see, began to close in with gray sparks, and he thought distantly with a strange calm that he was probably going to die in the dark under an alien moon holding onto a monster, and that as death's when it was not the worst he'd been offered this week, and that at least he'd gotten the collar off it first. At least he'd done that. And then they were rising. He felt it before he understood it, the body under him angling up, driving up, the pressure changing, and then his head broke a surface he couldn't see, and he hauled in a breath that was more sob than breath, the cold dead air of the abandoned reclaimed sump, and it was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted, and he lay along the specimen's back with his cheek against the wet gray plates and breathed and shook, and the beast trod water beneath him, holding them both up, waiting, patient, until the small, warm thing on its back remembered how to be alive. Okay, Sam got out finally. His voice was a wreck. He was laughing again, that same helpless, broken laugh from the first night. Okay, you did it. You did it. Look at you. He pressed his face to the streaming plates. Best dog on the whole damn moon. Get us to a wall, buddy. Let's get out of the water. The specimen swam them to the edge of the reclaimed sump, where a corroded maintenance ladder climbed up out of the dead water toward a hatch rimmed with the faint worklight of a living gallery, and Sam climbed off onto the slick stone lip and lay there a moment, and the beast heaved itself up out of the water beside him, streaming, enormous, and shook and settled, and put its scarred head down next to him on the cold stone, and the two of them lay there in the dark at the bottom of the mine, breathing. having done a thing that could not be done. Above them, faint through the hatch in the rock, came the ordinary clatter of a working shift. The deep galleries, 11,000 men who thought the syndicate could not be beaten, and did not yet know that the pit would not close, had just come up through the drains beneath their feet, out of the black water, on the back of the beast that loved him. Voralcast brought the pit down at the top of the next shift change, and it was, technically, a flawless operation. He supervised it himself, which he rarely did. 3 of his most reliable guards, the shock lances slung and unused because there was nothing to shock, and the demolition tech from the deep-cut crews who did not ask questions because deep-cut techs who asked questions did not stay deep-cut techs for long. The galleries were underground at the face exactly as planned. The surface levels were near empty. Cass stood in the handler gallery behind the armored slit and watched his tech seat the rupture charge in the pit's ceiling supports, and he felt the tight thing that had been sitting behind his sternum since the flood began at last to loosen. He had thought it through. There would be a structural failure in an old shaft. The moon was riddled with them. Everyone knew Blacklung was overdue a collapse or 3. There would be no pit, therefore no beast, therefore no human, therefore no story, only a great deal of rubble and a line in the maintenance ledger. The tale of the low word would have no ending, and a tale with no ending does not last. It needs the beast to keep beating the odds, it needs the human to keep surviving, and when both are simply gone under 1,000 tons of rock, the tale has nowhere to go. It starves. He had seen sparks starve before. He knew how it was done. Adept, he said. Yes stood at the far console, very still, her back to him, running the seismic monitors. Confirm the pit is sealed, both gates. Both gates sealed, Overseer. Her voice was flat. He put it down to nerves. She had never had the stomach for the useful part of the work. And the specimen is contained. A pause. The specimen is in the pit, Overseer. Which was, yes, would reflect, not technically a lie, in the sense that 1,000 tons of rock were now going to be in the pit, and the specimen was somewhere very much not in the pit, and both statements described the same volume of space. Then we are finished here, Cass gestured to the tech. Bring it down. The rupture charge fired, the moon shrugged. Deep in the rock, 40 feet of pit shaft folded in on itself, the scarred steel walls buckling, the sand and the sump grate and the mean little spigot, and the worn arcs where 8 men had run all vanishing under an avalanche of black stone, and the dust of it blew back through the handler gallery's slit and settled gray on Voralcast's gray coat, and he breathed it in, and for the first time in 3 days he felt the operation was his again. Log it, he said, as a support failure in the old entertainment shaft. Note the loss of a decommissioned specimen. Note no personnel casualties. He turned from the slit, brushing dust from his sleeve, and post the notice to the galleries at the next shift. Structural closure of the pit. All debt-conscripts to return to assigned faces. Let them draw the conclusion. The pit is gone. There is nothing left to hope at. Yes, Overseer, Yessa said. He was at the lift when the seismic console chimed, a soft double tone, an incidental reading, the kind of thing that logged 100 times a shift and meant nothing. Yes, glanced at it. Then she went very still in a different way than before. Overseer, she said. Something in her voice stopped him with his hand on the lift door. There is a motion signature in the reclaimed sump, she said, the abandoned drainage section. Below the deep galleries. She was reading it off the console, and she made her voice small and puzzled, an adept flagging an anomaly because she had spent 11 cycles learning how to make her voice do exactly what she needed it to do in this man's presence. A large biomass, moving. It came up through the old bores she let it land from the pit's sump line, before the collapse. The silence in the handler gallery was total. That's not possible, Cass said, but he had not moved. His chin was still held up by his stiff collar, but under it his throat had begun to work. The grate is bolted, Nothing that size fits the grate. The grate was levered off, Overseer, Yessa said, from inside. Some time before the collapse. She turned from the console at last and looked at him, and she let him see her face, and it was the calm, ruined, no longer loyal face of a scientist who has watched her own certainties drown and has decided, in the drowning, which side of the water she wants to come up on. The specimen swims, Overseer. It came from the deep water under the ice. I did put that in my findings. It's on page 9, a beat. They went out through the drain, both of them. Down into the deep galleries, where the 11,000 are. She let that sit exactly as long as he had let his own threats sit over the years on the balcony. You didn't bury the story. You dropped it down a hole that comes up in the one place you least wanted it. Voralcast stood in the settling dust of the pit he had just destroyed, and for the first time in 30 years of running Blacklung reach on the simple, reliable, load-bearing fact that the syndicate could not be beaten. He felt that fact go out from under him like a catwalk floor. "Sound the guards," he said. His voice had gone quiet, which was when it was worst, except that now there was a thing under the quiet that had never been there before, and Yes heard it, and it was fear. All of them, deep galleries, now. 40 guards, Overseer, Yes said, unmoving. For 11,000 men who just heard the pit couldn't kill him, and are about to watch him walk up out of the floor with the beast at his side. She almost smiled. She was too tired to smile. What exactly do you want the 40 to do? The boy called Callum was the first conscript to see them come up out of the floor, and he was 13 years old, and for the rest of a life that would run much longer and much freer than the one the syndicate had ledgered for him. He would tell it the same way every time, and every time the youngest listener would say that's not true. Nobody comes up out of a flooded drain on the back of a monster. And every time Callum would say, I was there, I saw it. I was the one who ran for the light. He worked the reclaim sump crew, the lowest and wettest work at Blacklung, hauling the slurry that the whole mine's washings settled into. It was where they put the conscripts nobody wanted, and the ones too small for the face, and Callum was both. Small for 13 and marked in the ledger as trouble ever since a third gallery man named Reyes had put himself between Callum's head and a foreman's shock mallet and gotten sent up the catwalk for it. Callum had not slept right since. He had lain in his stacked cage every night doing the arithmetic of it. A man was going to be eaten because of me, and no arithmetic he could do made it come out to anything he could carry. So when the dead water in the reclaimed sump began to move, Callum was the one standing closest, slurry rake in hand, and he saw the black surface heave, and he opened his mouth to shout collapse, flooding, run. And then a shape came up out of the water, huge and gray and streaming, plated like a war sled and scarred like an old grievance. And Callum's shout died because riding on its back with both fists in its mane was a man he knew, a man the whole gallery had marked for dead 3 days gone. A man named Reyes, alive, soaked, breathing, climbing off the back of the pit beast onto the sump ladder as easy as a man climbing off a draft animal at the end of a shift. Callum did not run for himself. That was the part he was proudest of later. He ran for the light up the gallery, past the stunned crews, into the working faces, shouting the only thing his mouth could find, which was not collapse and was not run, but was the thing that had been building in 11,000 chests for 3 days and now had a place to go. He's up, the pit couldn't keep him. Reyes is up out of the floor and the beast came with him. The deep galleries of Blacklung Reach stopped working. It did not happen the way an overseer fears a stoppage, all at once, a switch thrown. It happened the way water finds a crack, one crew, then the crew beside them, then the gallery beyond, the ore sleds slowing and stopping, the drills going quiet, men and women stepping back from the faces they had bent over for years and turning, all of them, toward the low reclaim levels where the boy's shout was coming from, and toward the thing the shout was about. Foremen bellowed. The bellowing did not carry the way it always had. A foreman's voice runs on the certainty behind it, and the certainty had just walked up out of a drain the syndicate swore was a grave. Sam Reyes stood at the bottom of the deep galleries, dripping, swaying a little on his feet, with one hand resting on the shoulder of the specimen, and he looked up the long rise of the worked-out stone at the faces gathering above him, hundreds of them, then more, filling the gallery mouths, silent, wanting, afraid to want. And he understood that he had come up into something much bigger than a pit, and that he had not planned for this part at all, and that they were waiting for him to say something. He was not a man for speeches. He had never in his life said a thing to more than a shift crew at once. So he did not make a speech. He looked up at them, at all those thin lifted faces in the ore light, and he found the small one near the front, the boy, the reason any of this had started, and he lifted his free hand and pointed at him, and he said the only thing that mattered, loud enough for the gallery to carry it the way the pit had carried everything. "That kid there," Sam said, "is worth more than this whole mine," and they were going to open his head over a quota. He let his hand drop. "I went in the pit for that. I'd do it again. And that thing down there in the grave they made me." He laid his palm flat on the great scarred flank beside him, and the specimen turned its ruined head and swept its good amber eye over the gathered thousands, and not one of them was fool enough to mistake what they were looking at. "That thing figured out in one night what the syndicate never has. That I wasn't the weak one in the room. Neither are you. There's 11,000 of us and 40 of them, and the only thing that ever made those numbers work in their favor was you believing they couldn't be beat." He looked up the galleries, slow, across all of it. "I just came up out of a hole they swore was the bottom of the world. So, you want to keep believing that?" The sound that came back down the galleries was the same sound the pit had made after the flood, only there were 11,000 throats in it now instead of 400, and it did not break against a balcony this time. It filled the mine. 2 levels up in the husbandry gallery. Yes, Loran listened to that sound come up through the rock, and she made her choice, the last one, the one there was no coming back from. She had spent the collapse and the discovery playing the part she had always played, the cautious adept, the flagger of anomalies, the loyal keeper of unpleasant findings. And it had gotten her exactly to this room, alone, with Cass gone down toward the deep galleries with his 40 guards and his 3 shock lances, and the whole husbandry level under her hand, and no one watching. The husbandry level was where the syndicate kept the rest of its animals. The pit had only ever shown the galleries one beast at a time, because one was all the theater needed, but Blacklung's tradition was old and its appetites were varied, and behind the sealed pens of the husbandry level, yes, had spent 11 cycles cataloging a menagerie of captured apexes. The pack hunters and their kin, a pair of tunnel stalkers from the deep bores, a crest hound taken as a cub and raised on the shock prod into something that hated the whole living world, and others. Each of them broken in the particular way the syndicate broke things, each of them wearing its own version of the black collar she had signed off on. She had built the pens, she knew every override. She had told herself for 11 cycles that the work was husbandry, that a thing in a pen was at least a thing kept alive, that her caution was a kindness. She had watched a human boy take a collar off a monster in a single night with his bare hands, saying easy, saying I've got you, and she had understood at last that her caution had never been a kindness. It had been the lock. She had been the one who kept the collars on. Yes, Loran walked the length of the husbandry level, and at each pen she stopped, and she entered the override and she opened the door. She did not do it dramatically. She did it the way she did everything precisely, one pen at a time, and as each door slid back she stood clear and she spoke to the thing inside in the flat, careful voice she had used to catalog it, except now the words were different. "You're done," she told the crest hound, which had not been out of its pen in 6 cycles and stood shaking in the open doorway not believing it. "Nobody's making you do this anymore. Go on. There's a human down in the deep galleries. If you've got any sense left after what we did to you, you'll go find him. He's the only thing on this moon that's safe to be near." The crest hound looked at her with its ruined eyes, and then it went, low and fast, down toward the sound in the galleries, toward the low word, toward the one hand on the moon that had ever come off a collar instead of tightening it. She opened them all, every collar she had ever signed, and then she keyed the husbandry log to broadcast, a thing an adept could do and an overseer could not undo without her codes, and she sent, to every gallery speaker in Blacklung Reach, in her flat, over-precise voice, the last entry she would ever file under the syndicate's authority. Attention! This is Dr. Adept Yes Loran Husbandry, for the record and correcting 11 cycles of my own findings. A breath. The specimen was never untamable. It was never a monster. It was a prisoner exactly like the rest of you, and it was waiting the same thing you were all waiting, for one person to come who wasn't afraid of it and didn't want to use it and took its pain away instead of adding to it. Her voice did not shake. She had decided it would not shake. The syndicate audit ship makes orbit in 90 minutes. When it docks, its inspectors will find that Overseer Cass illegally destroyed a shaft, falsified a casualty log, and lost control of this operation to a debt-conscript and an animal. I have the records. I am transmitting them now. A pause. Correction filed. Loran out. She set the slate down on the husbandry console, very gently, the way you set down a tool you are finished with, and she went to find the human, because she wanted, after 11 cycles of being wrong out loud to no one, to be on the right side of the water when it was over, and to see, just once with her own eyes, the thing she had spent her whole career swearing could not exist. Voral Cass met the uprising at the mouth of the deep galleries with 40 guards, and it did not go the way 200 years of syndicate history said it must. He had planned it in the lift on the way down because Cass always had a plan, and his plan was sound in the way all his plans were sound. Put the 40 guards in a line across the gallery mouth, shock lances forward, and let the conscripts remember what they were. 11,000 unarmed debt conscripts were not an army. They were 11,000 individual men, each of whom would, when the lance came up, remember that he personally did not want to be the one who died today. Fear was granular. That was the secret of it. You did not have to frighten a crowd. You had to frighten each man in it, one at a time, and the crowd frightened itself. It had always worked. It had worked for 30 years. He put his line across the gallery mouth. He raised the shock lances. And the front of the crowd, thin, filthy, exhausted men and women who had every reason to remember they did not want to die, did the arithmetic, and Cass watched them do it, watched the front rank hesitate, watched the granular fear begin to do its granular work. And for one moment he thought, there it is, it still holds. And then the specimen came up the gallery behind the human, and stood at his shoulder, and looked at the line of guards with its one good eye. It did not charge. That was the thing Cass could never afterward explain to the audit, the thing that broke his line without a single blow. It did not charge. It simply came up out of the dark of the deep galleries at the human side and stood, enormous and scarred and patient, its loosened collar hanging black around its healing neck, and it looked at the 40 guards the way a thing looks at prey it has decided not to bother with yet. And every guard in that line had spent his career on the safe side of the pit rail, watching this animal open men in seconds, and now it was on the wrong side of the rail. There was no rail. There was nothing between them, and it but 40 feet of gallery floor, and a human boy with his hand resting on its shoulder. The line did not break because it was brave. It broke because the fear Cass had always aimed so carefully at the conscripts turned around, all at once, and pointed at his own guards, and it turned out to be just as granular on that side. Each guard, individually, remembered that he personally did not want to be the one the beast reached first. And the shock lances wavered, and dipped, and one guard at the end of the line simply set his down and stepped back. And then that was granular too, and it went down the line faster than any order. And inside of a minute Voral Cass stood alone at the mouth of the deep galleries, with 40 guards behind him who were no longer, in any way that mattered, his. And behind the human, out of the side galleries, the freed things were coming. They came 1 and 2 at a time, low and wary, the crest hound and the tunnel stalkers and the pack hunters that had gone back and now returned, and others, each of them scarred, each of them wearing the loosened ruin of a collar, and they did not go to the crowd and they did not go to the guards. They flowed through the gathered conscripts, who drew back from them in terror and then, seeing where they were going, did not, and they arranged themselves around the human and the specimen, a ragged half-circle of the syndicate's own broken monsters, every apex blacklung had ever caged, gathered at the feet of the one soft creature who had never once tried to own them. Sam Rays stood in the middle of all of it, soaked and swaying and 13 kinds of tired, with a small army of impossible things ranged at his back and 11,000 freed conscripts filling the galleries behind them. And he looked at the old Vacary in the gray coat standing alone at the gallery mouth with his chin still held up by his stiff collar, and Sam felt no triumph, which surprised him. He mostly felt tired, and he mostly felt sorry, in a distant way, for a creature that had spent 30 years so afraid of being prey that it had turned an entire moon into a machine, for making other things afraid instead. "Overseer," Sam said, quiet, "the galleries carried it. It's over. The audit's 90 minutes out and your own adept just sent them everything. You've got no line, no pit, no story." He shifted his hand on the specimen's shoulder and the great head came up, and 40 guards flinched as one, and Sam felt the whole coiled lethal weight of the thing wanting, and he did not let it. And this, all of this, is one word away from being the worst thing that ever happened to you, so I want you to understand exactly who's deciding it isn't. Voral Cass did not run, and he did not beg, and the part of Sam that had spent a lifetime reading the men who held his ledger noted it, and did not like what it meant. A man who has lost everything and does not run is a man who thinks he has one card left. "You think this is over?" Cass said. His voice had come back to him, the quiet balcony voice, and he made himself very still in his gray coat at the gallery mouth with his 40 faithless guards behind him, and he lifted his chin off his collar and looked down the gallery at the human and the ring of monsters and the 11,000, and he smiled, thin and pale. "You've made a fine picture, Rays. The beast, the crowd, the little speech. But you've made one error, and it's the error the weak always make when they finally get a taste of strength. You've forgotten that I'm not the one who has to win." He reached, slow, into the breast of his gray coat. "I only have to make sure you don't." Every animal in the half-circle came up off its haunches at the movement, a low-massed sound rising out of a dozen scarred chests, and Sam felt the specimen gather itself under his hand like a wave drawing back off a beach. "Stay," Sam said. Just that. Low. He did not raise his voice and he did not raise his hand. He laid the word down flat on the air the way you lay a hand flat on a spooked animal's neck, and the specimen, one clean lunge from the man who had collared it, held. The whole half-circle held with it. 11,000 conscripts watched the pit beast stop. One word from a kill it had earned 11 times over, and go still. And a sound went through the galleries that was not the roar from before, that was quieter and deeper, and somehow worse for Cass to hear, because it was the sound of a great many people watching mercy be a choice instead of a weakness. Cass's hand came out of his coat with a shock pistol in it, and he leveled it at Sam's chest. "There," Cass said, and there was sweat on his pale crest now, a sheen of it in the ore light. "There, you hold it so well, keep holding it, because here is how this ends, dead flesh, here is the only way it ever could. Your legend needs you breathing. A dead martyr under 1,000 tons of rock the galleries forget. But a living man who walked up out of the floor that they follow. So you are going to be very careful, and you are going to order this crowd back to its faces, and you are going to send that animal down the drain it crawled out of, or I put a bolt through you here in front of all of them, and your 11,000 watch the pit close after all, 3 days late." His fingers settled on the stud. "And then they go back to work. They always go back to work. I have 30 years of them going back to work." The gallery had gone silent enough to hear the drip of water off the specimen's hide onto the stone. Sam looked at the pistol. Then he looked past it, at the old Vacary holding it, at the sweat on the pale crest, and the chin held up too high and the eyes that had gone wide and wet, and Sam understood the whole of it in that moment, all at once, the way he'd understood the worn arcs in the pit sand the first night. He understood that Vorel Cass was, and had always been, the single most frightened creature in the entire mine. That the collars and the pit and the granular fear and the 30 years of men going back to work had all been the works of a thing so afraid of being prey that it had built a world where it could never, ever be. And that Sam, soaked and swaying and unarmed with a gun on his chest, was the calmest creature in the gallery, and that Cass could feel it, and that it was killing him. "You're shaking," Sam said, not cruel, just true the way he'd told the specimen about the collar. "Look at your hand, 30 years and you're the one shaking." "Order them back." "No," Sam said. "I will fire." "I know you think you will." Sam did not move. He kept his hand on the specimen's shoulder, and he kept the beast held with the flat weight of his stillness, and he looked at the old overseer down the barrel of the shock pistol the way he'd looked at him off the catwalk, tired and matter-of-fact, a man watching another man try something stupid and expensive. "But here's the thing you got wrong, and it's the same thing you got wrong about the pit. You think I'm the weak one holding a strong thing back. You've had it backwards this whole time." He let a slow breath go. "I'm not holding it back because it's stronger than me and I'm scared of what it'll do. I'm holding it back because it'd tear the gallery apart to get to you, and I don't want the boy to see that. That's the only reason you're still standing. Not your gun, not your 30 years, me, deciding. And you can feel it, can't you? You can feel that the only thing keeping you alive in this room is the mercy of the man you threw in a hole to die." Cass's hand shook harder. "Order them back," he said again, but it had gone to a whisper now, and it was not a command anymore. It was almost a plea, and the galleries heard that too. And behind Cass, unnoticed, the guard at the end of the line, the one who had set his lance down first, a young one, low-crested, a guard because on this moon the choice had been guard or conscript, and his ledger had broken the wrong way. That guard stepped forward, quiet, and put the muzzle of his own shock lance against the small of Vorel Cass's back. "Overseer," the young guard said. His voice cracked on it. He was maybe 20. "Put it down. The audit's docking. It's over. Put it down or He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. For a long moment Vorel Cass stood at the mouth of the deep galleries with a human's mercy in front of him, and his own guard's lance at his back, and 30 years of certainty running out through the floor. And Sam watched the calculation move across that pale face, the last desperate arithmetic of a creature that had never once in its life been the one afraid, and watched it come out finally to nothing, to zero, to a closed ledger. The shock pistol dropped from his hand and clattered on the stone. The sound the galleries made then went on for a long time. They took Cass without a hand laid on him harder than needed to walk him, and that was Sam's doing too. He came down off the specimen's flank and crossed the gallery floor through the parting crowd, and the pack moved to flow after him, and he stopped them with a lifted hand, "Stay." And he walked up to the disgraced overseer alone, unarmed, and the two of them stood a moment face to face, the old frightened thing in the gray coat and the young calm one in the ration sack tunic. "You could have just fed it," Sam said. Quiet between the two of them, though the pit-trained acoustics of the gallery carried it anyway, carried everything. "First night. You could have thrown down a haunch of something and let it eat, and it'd have been calm, and I'd have died like the other 8, and you'd still have your mine and your story and your 30 years. He shook his head slowly. "You had a hurting animal in a hole, and every single time the answer was to hurt it more. That's the whole of you, overseer. That's your entire strategy laid out. And it's why you lost to a man with nothing but a kind word and a pair of hands." He stepped back. "Take him up to the audit. Don't hurt him. He's not worth what it'd cost you to become the kind of thing that would." They walked Vorel Cass up out of the deep galleries, and the 11,000 watched him go, and not one of them spat on him or struck him, because the human had asked them not to, and because there was a new thing loose in Blacklung Reach that morning that was better than vengeance, and they could all feel it. And it did not have a name yet. and it would take them a while to learn that the name was simply what it was like to not be afraid. Dr. Adept, yes, Loran found Sam at the bottom of the galleries a few minutes later, sitting on an overturned ore sled because his legs had finally quit, with the specimen curled around him and its scarred head in his lap, and its good amber eye half closed while he worked, absently, gently, at the crusted seam of the loosened collar with his thumb. The pack lay ranged around them, the crest hound and the tunnel stalkers and the pack hunters, watchful at rest. The boy Callum sat cross-legged a careful arm's length from the specimen's tail, not touching, just near, the way you sit near a fire. Yes, he stopped a few paces off. She had rehearsed nothing to say. She was a scientist. She had spent 11 cycles with words and none of them fit this. Sam looked up at her. He knew the voice, she realized. He'd never seen her face and he knew her at once, from the careful, over-precise voice on the speaker, from the warning about the pack hunters, from the drainage map, from the correction filed out loud to 11,000 people. "You're the adept," he said. "I signed the order for the collar," Yes said. It was the only true thing she had. She made herself say it standing up, looking at him the way he said things. 11 cycles ago, non-domesticable, disposal use only. I built the pens. Every animal in this half-circle wore a collar because I wrote that they couldn't be reached. Her 4 fingers had closed into fists at her sides. You took it off in a night, with your hands. I have spent my whole professional life being a very careful, very respected, very well-compensated coward, and you took the collar off in a night, and I do not have anything to say to you that isn't too small. So I opened the pens, and I sent the records to the audit, and I came down here to look at the thing I said couldn't exist. That's all. That's everything I've got." Sam was quiet a moment, his thumb still moving on the specimen's collar seam, and the beast breathed its slow bellows breath in his lap. "You warned me about the pack hunters," he said. "Low from the flanks, 6 at once. You didn't have to do that. That's the night you stopped being a coward, adept. You just took till this morning to catch up to yourself." He nodded at the specimen. "Come here, slow, let it smell you. It remembers the collar hands. It won't forget those either. But it's smart, smarter than any of us gave it credit for, and it knows the difference between a hand that took a collar off and a hand that put one on. Let it decide." Yes, Loran, who had catalogued this creature for 11 cycles from behind an armored slit and written it into a disposable thing, came forward one careful step at a time and knelt, and held out one trembling 4-fingered hand, and the specimen opened its good amber eye and looked at her, and its nostrils worked, taking in the smell of the hands that had signed its collar. And then, while Yes knelt there and did not breathe, the great scarred head came off Sam's lap, slow, and stretched toward her, and pressed once, cool and heavy and forgiving, into her open palm. She made a sound she was not proud of. Sam pretended not to hear it. He was kind that way. "There," he said softly, to the beast, to the adept, to all of it. "See. Nobody in this hole was ever a monster. Took us long enough to figure out who kept saying we were." The syndicate audit ship put down its inspectors 91 minutes after Yes' broadcast, and the senior of them was a Vakri magistrate named Serwa Ix, who had spent 40 cycles auditing frontier operations, and had come to Blacklung Reach fully expecting the usual cooked ledgers, skimmed ore, a fat overseer with his claw in the till, and who was entirely unprepared for what actually met her at the top of the deep galleries. What met her was Voral Cass, disgraced, walked up under his own guard's lance, his gray coat filthy with the dust of a shaft he'd illegally destroyed, trying with the last of his ruined dignity to explain to her that there had been an insurrection, a beast loose, an adept in revolt, that he was the victim of it. And behind and below him, when Magistrate Ix walked to the gallery rail and looked down, there was the rest of the sentence he could not finish. 11,000 debt-conscripts, not working, not rioting, simply standing, quiet, in the galleries of a mine that had run on their fear for 200 years, and none of it in their faces anymore. And at the bottom of it, on an overturned ore sled, a small soft pink creature, a human, she registered, one of the dead species they conscripted off the failed colonies, sitting calm and unbothered with an apex predator's scarred head in its lap, ringed by a half-circle of the deadliest animals the syndicate had ever caged, every one of them loose, every one of them collar broken, every one of them arranged around that one soft creature like iron filings around a lodestone. Magistrate HFY had audited a great many operations. She knew, at a glance, the difference between an overseer who had lost control of his ledger and an overseer who had lost control of the thing underneath the ledger, the load-bearing thing, the thing you were never supposed to let the conscript see could be lost. "Overseer Cass," she said without turning from the rail, "be quiet. Magistrate, I must protest this animal, this human they have." I said be quiet. She watched the human below tend the beast's neck with its thumb, watched the great predator lean into the small soft hand, watched 11,000 freed conscripts watch it too, and HFY, who was old and clever and entirely without sentiment, did the syndicate's arithmetic, the only arithmetic that had ever mattered to her, and saw exactly what it came to. "You had one job at this station, Cass," she said. "You did not have to be liked, you did not have to be just. You had to keep 11,000 conscripts believing the syndicate could not be beaten. That is the entire commodity. The ore is secondary." She turned at last and looked at him, and her contempt was a cold, institutional thing, worse than fury. "And you took the one animal in your custody that could not be broken, and you dropped a debt conscript into a hole with it to make a point about how nothing here can win, and it won. In front of everyone. Twice. And then it came up out of the floor and took your guards and your galleries and your whole load-bearing lie. And the only thing standing between you and being torn apart in your own mind right now is the mercy of the conscript you threw away." She let that sit precisely, the way he had let his own cruelties sit over the years. "You didn't lose an operation, Cass. You proved the syndicate can be beaten on the record to 11,000 witnesses and an animal. There is no line in my ledger deep enough to bury that. You have cost us this whole moon." Magistrate HFY came down into the deep galleries to speak to the human, and that was the moment the last of the old order died, though it would take the galleries a while to understand what they'd just seen. Because she came down, she did not summon him up. In 200 years, no vacary of the audit had ever descended to the conscript levels for any reason but to count bodies, and here was a magistrate of the syndicate walking down the worked-out stone in her clean dark coat, past 11,000 watching faces, to stand, at a careful distance, a distance she chose with the precise instinct of a creature that had survived 40 cycles of frontier work by knowing exactly how close was too close, before a soaked, exhausted, ordinary young man sitting on an ore sled with a monster's head in his lap. The pack came up as she approached. The low-massed sound rose. Sam laid his hand flat on the specimen's shoulder without looking away from the magistrate. "Stay," he said, and they stayed. And HFY marked that too, the word and the obedience and the ease of it, and revised again upward her estimate of what she was dealing with. "You're the one who runs the ledgers," Sam said. He didn't get up. His legs still wouldn't have let him, but he also, noticed, simply did not get up, the way a man doesn't get up for someone he hasn't decided is owed it, and the magistrate noticed it too and let it pass, which was its own kind of answer. "The real ones, not the mine, the syndicate. I am Magistrate HFY, I audit operations." She folded her four-fingered hands. "You are the conscript rays." "I'm the conscript you were about to lose money on," Sam said. 91 labor cycles and falling is what your man Cass had me at. I imagine I've cost you a good deal more than that since." He shifted the beast's head gently in his lap. "So let's you and me do the arithmetic he was too scared to do, because I've been listening to you people count for 3 days and I think I finally understand how you count. You don't care what happened here, not the morals of it. You care what it costs and what it makes. Right. That is a serviceable summary of my profession," Ick said. "Then here's your ledger." Sam looked up at her, and around at the galleries at the 11,000 at the Ring of Freed Monsters, and he was so tired he could barely hold his head up, but his voice stayed flat and level and carrying, the pit voice, the low word turned up loud. You've got 11,000 debt conscripts who just watched the syndicate get beaten. You cannot put that back. You said it yourself, that was the whole commodity and it's spent, it's gone, no line in your ledger's deep enough. So the fear's dead. Now you've got two ways to run the numbers. He held up one finger. 1. You bring in troops. You put it down hard, you kill enough of us to matter, you make a new kind of fear to replace the one that broke. Except it's on the record now, your own magistrates here, your own adept sent the files up the line, and a massacre on a moon where the story's already loose is the kind of thing that spreads to the other 11 moons, and then it's not 11,000 doing arithmetic about whether the syndicate can be beat. It's 100,000, and that's a war you have to pay for out of ore that's mostly mined out anyway. He let it sit. Then he held up a second finger. Or, 2, you cut it loose. You write the debts off, they're bad debts. We both know it, this seam's been dying for a cycle. Cass was closing ledgers because the ore couldn't cover the mouths. You call it a decommission. You pull your gray coats off this rock and you let it go, and it costs you a dying mine and a bad quarter and a line in a report nobody upstairs will read twice. And the story that gets out isn't, the syndicate can be beaten. It's the syndicate cut a losing position, cold like it always does. Which is the story you'd rather have anyway, isn't it? The gallery was silent. Yes, Loran, standing at the edge of it, understood that she was watching something she would not have believed possible 3 days ago. A debt conscript, soaked and swaying, laying out the syndicate's own cold logic to a syndicate magistrate, and doing it better than the magistrate would have and being right. HFY was quiet for a long moment. Her wet black eyes moved over him and over the beast in his lap, and over the 11,000 and over the ring of loosed apexes, and she did the arithmetic, the real arithmetic, the only kind she had ever trusted, and Sam watched her do it, and watched it come out where he'd known it would, because he had finally learned the one true thing about these people, which was that their coldness that had been used against him and everyone like him his whole life could be turned, could be aimed, could be made to cut the right way if you were calm enough to hold it steady while you pointed it. You reason, Ix said slowly, like an overseer, a better one than the one I'm relieving. I reason like a man who spent his whole life being counted, Sam said. You learn a thing's language when it owns you. The debts are difficult to simply. They're bad debts on a dead seam, Sam said. You'll book the write-off in a quarter and forget it in 2. Don't make it more than it is. It's not mercy. I know you don't do mercy. It's just the cheaper number. Take the cheaper number, magistrate. Walk off this rock a magistrate who cut a loss instead of one who started a war on 11 moons over a mine that was already dying. He put his hand on the specimen's neck. And leave the animals. They're not on any ledger worth the ink. They're broken and they're ours now. You couldn't take them if you tried, and you'd lose good people trying. And for what? For a menagerie you were only ever going to feed into a pit that doesn't exist anymore. Magistrate HFY looked at the human for a long moment, and then she did the thing that told the whole gallery, better than any decree, how the arithmetic had come out. She inclined her crested head. A fraction. The smallest acknowledgement in her species' vocabulary, the gesture one senior vacary gave another across a negotiating table when a point had been conceded and respected, and she gave it to a soaked debt conscript sitting on an ore sled, and 11,000 people saw her give it. I will book it as a decommission of an exhausted seam, she said. The debts of the Black Lung conscript register will be written off as unrecoverable. The syndicate will withdraw its personnel within the cycle. Her eyes went once to the beast in his lap, and something crossed them that, in a warmer species, might have been wonder. The animals are not on my ledger. I never saw them. See that they are never on anyone's ledger again. She turned to go and then stopped and looked back at him and asked the only question that was not arithmetic, the one she would not be able to explain to herself later. How did you know it wouldn't kill you? The first night. Every model we had said it would kill you. Sam looked down at the great scarred head in his lap, at the good amber eye looking back up at him, at the loosened black collar he was still, absently, working free with his thumb. "I didn't," he said. "I just figured a thing in that much pain that's killed 8 men who came at it screaming maybe nobody'd ever tried the other thing. Maybe it wasn't hungry. Maybe it was lonely and hurting and everybody it ever met made it worse." He shrugged, a small tired motion. "So I sat down and I kept my hands where it could see them and I told it I wasn't going anywhere. That's all. That's the whole trick. I treated the monster like it might not want to be won." He met the magistrate's eyes. "You'd be amazed how far that goes. With any of us." Sarah Ix held his gaze a moment longer. Then she left up the long galleries past the 11,000, and she did not summon Vorocast to walk beside her, which was in the end the deepest cut of all, that the syndicate did not even punish him grandly, did not make an example, but simply folded him into the withdrawal like a bad line item, a decommissioned asset, a thing that had failed and would be quietly written off and never spoken of again, which was exactly the fate he had designed, 30 years running, for everyone beneath him. They got the collar all the way off the specimen that evening, when the syndicate's gray coats had begun their sullen withdrawal, and the deep galleries had found, cautiously, something like celebration. It took Sam and Yes together, and the right tools at last, cutters and a med kit from the husbandry stores, all of it Yes his, all of it laid out with her flat, precise care, and it took the specimen holding still through a thing that hurt, one more time, because Sam asked it to. He knelt at the great scarred neck in the ore light with the boy Callum holding the lamp and Yes working the cutter and the whole pack ranged around them watching, and he kept his hand on the broad gray jaw, and he talked the whole time. "Low, easy, I've got you, hold, almost there." And the specimen trembled and held, and the black band that had been buried in its flesh for 11 years came away at last in 2 curved pieces. And Yes cleaned and packed the long weeping wound beneath it with the competence of a scientist who had finally found something in her training worth using. And when it was done, when the collar lay in 2 black pieces on the stone, the specimen lifted its head and turned its neck, slow, testing, feeling the absence of a weight it had carried so long it must have forgotten there was any other way to be. And it made the sound again, the round, quiet one from the edge of the drain, and it put its scarred face against Sam's chest and leaned, the whole terrible weight of it, and Sam wrapped his arms as far around that great gray head as they'd go and held it. And the deep galleries of Blacklung Reach, 11,000 strong, watched a man hold a monster while it grieved 11 years all the way out, and not one of them thought it strange, because there was no one left in that mine who still believed the thing in his arms was the monster. "That's it," Sam said into the gray hide. His own voice had gone. "That's the last one. Nobody's ever putting anything around your neck again. I promise you that. I'll spend the rest of my life on that promise if I have to." Callum, holding the lamp, was crying and trying not to, the way boys do. Yes set down her cutter and did not try not to. "What's its name?" Callum asked when he could. "Everybody's going to ask. The whole moon's going to ask. What do we call it?" Sam sat back on his heels and looked at the beast, at the loosened neck, and the cleared amber eye and the old gray armored bulk of it, at the thing that had come from the black water under the ice and been dragged across the stars in a cage, and collared and starved and set to killing and had, in the end, chosen a soaked and worthless debt-conscript over all of it. He thought about a homestead a long way back, and an ugly gray working dog that slept across a barn door and took the hand off anyone who reached for the tack without leave, and had stood in the yard when they came, and would not move. "Duke," Sam said. "His name's Duke." The beast's ragged ear swiveled toward the sound of it, and held. "Duke," Callum repeated, trying it, and the word went up the galleries the way everything went up the galleries in that place, passed hand to hand, mouth to mouth, 11,000 times, until the whole of Blacklung Reach knew the name of the thing that had ended the fear, and it was not a monster's name and it was not a hero's name. It was just a good plain name for a good gray animal, And that, in the end, was the entire point. The syndicate took 8 days to leave, and they were strange days, days with no shape to them. Because, for the first time in the memory of anyone at Blacklung Reach, the shift horn did not rule the hours. Yes, Loran, who understood systems, kept a few of them running out of plain necessity: the air scrubbers, the water reclaim, the power that kept 11,000 people from freezing on a moon with no sun. And she found, to her quiet astonishment, that the conscripts helped her, that men and women who had bent over the faces in silence for years turned out to know exactly how the mind breathed, and that a great deal of what the gray coats had called supervision had only ever been theft with a clipboard. Sam Reyes did not become a leader exactly, though everyone kept trying to make him one. He was not built for it, and he knew it, and he kept saying so, and it kept not mattering, because when 11,000 frightened people stop being afraid all at once, they need something to steer by. And they had all, every one of them, watched the same thing steer true when it counted. So they brought their disputes to him, and their fears, and their impossible questions about what came next. And Sam answered the ones he could and said, "I don't know," to the rest, plainly, which turned out to be a thing they trusted more than the gray coat's certainty had ever been. He set up a council, the old water carrier who'd first named the low word, and a face boss who'd secretly kept a tally of every conscript the syndicate had worked to death. And yes, and over Sam's objection, and to the boy's speechless pride, Callum, because Sam said a place that forgets to ask the youngest what they see goes wrong the same way every time. He made them do the deciding. He mostly sat in the back with Duke's head on his boot and let them. And everywhere he went, the pack went. That was the thing the departing gray coats could not stop looking at in those 8 days, and could not understand, and would carry off the moon with them as the story that outran every official decommission report. The human, ordinary and soft and unarmed, walking the galleries of the mine with a ruin of collar-broken apexes flowing around him. Duke at his left, always, the great gray bulk of him matched to the man's pace like a shadow with weight. The crest hound ranging ahead, clearing the corners, its old collar hate melted down into a fierce and total watchfulness. The tunnel stalkers high on the gallery walls, moving above him in the dark. The pack hunters, the 6 of them whole again, the 2 that had fled had crept back within a day, drawn out of the deep bores by whatever the others had found running low at his flanks in the loose net formation they'd once used to hunt him, turned now entirely to his keeping. When Sam stopped, the pack stopped. When Sam turned, the pack turned. When a departing overseer once, on the 5th day, raised his voice too sharply at a conscript woman within sight of the human, every animal in the gallery came up off the stone as one and faced him without a sound, and the overseer went the color of ash and did not raise his voice again, on that day or any other, and neither did any of his fellows, and the word for that. The way the whole lethal weight of the pack turned on a threat to anyone the human had taken under his hand. The galleries coined without meaning to, and it stuck, and it was the long look, and by the 7th day even the Vakri were using it quietly to warn each other. Don't draw the long look, whatever you do, before we're off this rock. They got the long look exactly once more before they left, and it was Voral Cass who drew it. He had been kept in the old overseer's block through the withdrawal, neither honored nor abused, fed and ignored, a decommissioned asset waiting for the audit ship's return berth. And on the 7th evening he got loose, not through any plan, just an unlocked door in the general unraveling of the old order, and he made his way down, gray coat and all, to the mouth of the deep galleries, because a creature cannot always help returning to the scene of the thing that unmade it. Sam was there at the ore sled that had become, without anyone deciding it, the place things got settled. Duke was there. The pack was there. The gallery went quiet when Cass appeared at the rail, thin and pale and diminished, his stiff collar gone so that his chin hung at last at an ordinary angle, and for a long moment no one knew what he meant to do, and the pack came up, low and massing, and the long look turned on him, the whole terrible weight of it, and Vorel Cass, who had thrown 8 men and then a 9th into a hole to be killed by the very animal now staring him down, stood in it, and did not run. "I came to ask you something," Cass said. His voice had lost the balcony in it. It was just an old, frightened creature's voice now. "They will take me up on the ship tomorrow, and I will be a line in a report, and no one will ever say my name again, which you will think is justice, and perhaps it is. But I have to know before, and there is no one to ask but you." He looked at the beast, at Duke, at the loosened, healing neck and the cleared eye. 11 years I had that animal. 11 years, and it never once looked at me the way it looks at you. I fed it. I kept it alive. I gave it purpose. And you gave it what? A night. A kind word. Why did it choose you and not me? What did you have that I did not?" And Sam Rays looked at the old Vacary for a long moment, and there was no cruelty in his face, and no triumph, only that same tired plainness, and he gave the honest answer, which was the worst thing he could possibly have said and the only true one. "You kept it alive to use it," Sam said. "I sat down next to it to keep it company." He put his hand on Duke's neck, on the place the collar had been. "That's the whole difference, Overseer, that's the entire thing. You spent 11 years asking what that animal could do for you. I spent one night asking what somebody done to it, and it knew. They always know. Every creature you ever put a collar on knew exactly what you were the second you touched them." He held the old thing's eyes. "You didn't lose because you were weak. You lost because in 30 years on this rock it never once occurred to you that the things underneath you were worth a kind word, and it occurred to me because I was one of them. That's it. That's the answer you crossed a mind to get. Now go on up. Don't make Duke look at you any more. He carried you long enough." Vorel Cass stood a moment longer. Then he inclined his head, the small Vacary concession, the same gesture the magistrate had given now by a broken overseer to the debt-conscript who had unmade him, and he turned, and he climbed back up the galleries alone, and that was the last anyone at Blacklung Reach ever saw of him. Sam let out a breath and put his forehead down against Duke's for a moment, tired all the way to the bone. "Company's all it ever was, buddy," he said, quiet, "just for the beast. That's all it ever is." On the 9th day, the syndicate ship broke orbit, and Blacklung Reach belonged to the people who had dug it. There was no ceremony, because Sam wouldn't have one. He said ceremonies were how the gray coats had made everything feel bigger and colder than it was, and that whatever they built here was going to feel like people, or it wasn't worth building. But the galleries emptied up toward the surface levels that no conscript had been permitted in 200 years, up the long-dead lift shafts and the maintenance stairs. 11,000 of them climbing toward a thing most of them had never seen and the youngest had never once believed in. And Sam climbed with them, with Yes beside him and Callum ahead and Duke's great bulk heaving up the stairs at his shoulder, one patient joint-stiff step at a time, and the pack flowing up through the dark around them all. The surface of the moon was not much. That was the truth of it. A cold gray plain of black rock under a black sky, the ice fields glittering hard and distant on the horizon, the far sun a white pinprick that gave light without warmth. It was a poor, mean, unlovely place, the far edge of nowhere, a rock the syndicate had bled for 2 centuries and would now forget in a quarter. But it was open. The sky went up and up with nothing over it, no gallery ceiling, no pit rim, no rail, and the 11,000 came up out of the ground into that open cold and stood in it and looked up, and a sound went through them that was not the roar of the galleries and was not a cheer. It was quieter, and it broke something loose in every chest that had it, the simple, unfamiliar, almost unbearable sound of a great many people breathing air that no one owned. Sam stood at the edge of the crowd with his hand resting on Duke's shoulder and watched them see the sky. And then he felt the beast under his hand go still in a way he'd learned to read, an alert stillness, and he followed the good amber eye out across the black plain to the ice fields on the horizon, distant and hard and glittering, and he understood what the animal was looking at, and something in his chest ached and eased at the same time. "That's the far side, isn't it?" he said softly. "The dark hemisphere, The deep water under the ice. That's where you came from before any of this." He looked at the beast, at the loosened neck and the healing wound and the cleared eye fixed on the far horizon of a home it had been stolen from 11 years ago. "You could go, you know. Nobody's collaring you again. Nobody's making you do anything ever again. That was the whole promise. You could walk out across that plain and go back to the water and be free of every last one of us. I wouldn't stop you. I wouldn't ever stop you. Free means free, or it means nothing." He meant it. That was the thing. He meant every word, and it cost him to mean it. And Duke, who had spent 11 years learning the precise difference between a creature that wanted to use him and a creature that wanted to keep him company, heard the cost in it and understood it exactly. The beast looked at the ice fields for a long moment, at the deep water, at the black home under the sun's edge, free for the taking, one long walk across the open plain away. And then the great scarred head turned away from the horizon and came back, and Duke leaned his whole terrible weight against the small warm creature at his shoulder, the way he had that first night in the pit, the way he had when the collar came off, and he let out the round, quiet sound, the one that wasn't a warning, the one Sam had never quite been able to name, and he stayed. Sam Rays stood on the cold surface of a mean gray moon with his arms around a monster that had chosen him twice, once in a pit and once in the open with the whole free dark laid out before it. And he did not say anything for a while, because there was nothing that needed saying, and the 11,000 looked up at the sky, and the pack settled on the black rock around them, watchful at rest. And the far sun gave its thin cold light down on the first morning in 200 years that belonged to no one at all. They named the place Deepwater in the end, after some argument, and the argument itself was the point, that they were the kind of settlement now that argued about its own name instead of being handed one. The old water carrier wanted something grand. Callum, who was 14 by then and on the council in earnest, wanted to name it after Sam, and Sam refused so flatly and went so red that the boy dropped it and never raised it again. It was Yes of all of them who said Deepwater quietly in the flat, precise voice that no longer sounded like a syndicate adepts at all, because that was where the beast had come from and where it had carried the human through the dark, and where the whole of it had turned, because deep water was the place under everything, the place the collars couldn't reach, the place a thing went to be itself. They put it to the council, and it carried without another word. Deepwater grew the way a thing grows when it is finally allowed to. The dying seam gave what it had left, and they husbanded it instead of tearing it. They turned the upper levels the syndicate had used for barracks and cells into places people actually lived. They got a hydroponics run going in the old husbandry level, in the empty pens, which struck everyone as exactly right. Ships began to come, not many, and warily at first, because the story of what had happened at Blacklung Reach had gone out on the departing gray coats and mutated in the telling into a dozen wild shapes. But they came, free traders and frontier drifters, and once a delegation from a mining moon 3 systems over where the conscripts had heard the story and done their own arithmetic and were asking carefully how. Sam talked to that one for a long time. And through all of it, the pack kept Deepwater, and Deepwater came to understand exactly what it had, and to guard it the way you guard the one true thing you were never supposed to be allowed to have. Because here was the fact that made Deepwater safe on the mean far edge of nowhere, safer than any syndicate garrison had ever made Blacklung. Everyone who came to that moon learned within an hour of docking that the ordinary-looking human who spoke for the settlement walked everywhere inside a ring of the deadliest animals in the sector, and that those animals were not tame, and were not caged, and answered to nothing on the moon but him, and that they had, every one of them, been a syndicate weapon once, and had chosen this instead. Traders learned to keep their voices even around the human. Drifters learned not to reach for anything sudden. The word for it that the syndicate had coined in its last frightened days, the long look, went out into the frontier with the traders and became the thing that kept Deepwater unmolested, a warning passed hand to hand across a dozen systems. There is a human on that gray rock, and a pack that loves him, and you do not draw the long look. They tested it exactly once in the second year, and Sam let it be tested, because he understood that a thing untested is a thing not yet believed. A scavenger crew came, 4 ships, a rough outfit out of the shipbreaking lanes, the kind that made its living picking the bones of dead operations, and Blacklung Reach was on their charts as a decommissioned syndicate asset, which in their trade meant abandoned, which meant free. They put down on the surface with cutting gear and cargo haulers, and the casual violence of men who had never in their lives met a frontier settlement that could stop them. And their boss, a heavy-scarred Valkyrie gone freelance, walked down into the upper levels of Deepwater with a shock rifle slung and a dozen armed hands at his back, expecting to find squatters he could clear. He found Sam Reyes sitting on a crate in the old lift concourse, ordinary and unarmed and mildly amused, drinking something hot out of a battered cup, with a 14-year-old boy beside him, and a gray-scarred apex the size of a loading sled lying across the whole width of the concourse floor at his feet. "This is a decommissioned asset," the scavenger boss said. He had done this 100 times. He had the speech. "Syndicate charts show it abandoned. That makes it salvage. That makes it mine. You and your people have got 1 hour to clear the levels before we start cutting, and if you're smart, you'll—" Duke lifted his head off the floor. That was all. He did not rise, and he did not snarl, and he did nothing that could be called a threat in any court. The great gray-scarred head simply came up off the stone and turned, unhurried, and fixed the scavenger boss with one clear amber eye. And behind the man, in the mouths of the concourse's 4 dark corridors, the rest of the pack came silent out of the shadows where they had been the whole time, the crest hound and the tunnel stalkers and the 6-pack hunters, and ranged themselves, without sound, without rush, into a loose and total geometry around the 12 armed men, and the 12 armed men understood. All at once and each individually, in the granular way that fear actually works, that they had walked their whole crew into a room that was already closed. Sam took a sip from his battered cup. "Charts are out of date," he said. "It's not abandoned. It's called Deepwater, and 11,000 people live here, and it belongs to them." He set the cup down on his knee. "Now, you came a long way, and I'd hate for it to be for nothing, so I'll make you the same offer I make everybody who puts down here thinking it's free pickings. You holster that rifle, and you tell your crew to shut down the cutting gear, and you come have a hot drink and talk to me like a person, and we'll see if there's honest trade to be done. This seems got tailings your kind of outfit could work at a profit, and we could use the ships. Or—" he glanced down, mild, at the gray head at his feet, at the ring of silent shapes in the dark. "You keep the rifle up, and you find out why the syndicate wrote this rock off instead of holding it. But I think hard about that second one, friend, because everything in this room that isn't me was a weapon somebody built to kill people like you, and the only reason not one of them has moved yet is that I'm sitting here drinking my tea and I haven't said the word." He picked the cup back up. "And I really would rather just have the tea." The scavenger boss looked at the human. He looked at the boy, who had not moved, who was watching him with a 14-year-old's flat, unimpressed calm, a calm the boy had learned from exactly one person. He looked at the great scarred beast lying across the floor with its one clear eye on him, and at the ring of silent death, arranged so casually in the dark around his crew. And he did the arithmetic that everyone who came to that moon eventually did, and he came out where they all came out. He holstered the rifle. "What kind of tailings?" he said. Sam smiled, for real, the first real one in a while, and Duke put his head back down on the cool stone, and the pack melted back into the shadows as quietly as they'd come, and the boy Callum let out a breath he'd been holding and grinned. And that was the last time anyone ever tested whether Deepwater could keep itself. They did honest trade with that crew for 6 years, in the end. The scavenger boss became something close to a friend in the rough way of the frontier, and he was the one who carried the story furthest of all, up and down the shipbreaking lanes, embroidered and sworn to and mostly true. That there was a human out on the far gray edge of the vacuary worlds who had gone into a syndicate death pit and come out with an army, and that the deadliest predators in the sector followed him like the tide follows a moon, and that they did it not because he had broken them, but because, alone among every creature they had ever met, he had never once tried. Sam Rays lived a long life on that mean gray moon, longer than the 91 labor cycles the syndicate had once valued him at by a margin that would have broken Voral Cass's ledger clean in half. And it was, by every measure that he had ever learned to care about, a good one. He never did become the leader the 11,000 kept trying to make him. He stayed on the council and mostly sat in the back. He worked with his hands because he liked to, in the hydroponics runs and the water reclaim, the same plain work he'd have done anywhere. And people learned that if they wanted to talk to him, the way to do it was to pick up a tool and work beside him. And a great many of Deepwater's hardest decisions got made that way, 2 people and a task, and the low even voice that the whole moon had learned to trust. He watched Callum grow into a man who could hold a room, and step back and let him. He watched, yes, Loran spend the rest of her cycles undoing, one careful act at a time, the 11 she had spent building collars, and he told her more than once, when she couldn't forgive herself, that the night she'd warned him about the pack hunters was the night that mattered, and that a person is what they choose when it costs them, not what they were before they learned better. And every day of it, Duke was at his shoulder. The beast aged, as Sam aged, slower but the same road. The gray went grayer. The joints that had heaved up the maintenance stairs that first free morning got stiffer, and the far ice field stopped being a thing Duke watched with the ache of a stolen home and became just the horizon, just the edge of the place they both lived now. He never went back to the deep water. He had chosen in the open with the whole free dark before him, and he did not unchoose, not in all the years, and Sam never once stopped being quietly amazed by it, never once took it for granted, never once let a day go by without putting his hand on the place where the collar had been and saying something low and easy that was, underneath whatever the words were, always the same thing: thank you. I know what you gave up. I have not forgotten it. I will never forget it. The pack changed over the years, the way packs do. Some of the old ones died in their time of nothing worse than time, and were buried out on the black plain where the sky went up forever and mourned. New ones came, strays off the frontier, a wounded thing a trader brought because he'd heard there was a moon where a human took the collars off, and there was exactly that. The pack was never uniform and never small and never entirely safe, and Deepwater would not have had it any other way, because a settlement kept by things that had chosen to keep it was a settlement that never forgot what it had cost to be free, or how thin the line was, or how much it mattered to walk on the right side of the water. But Duke was always first. Duke was always at his left. Duke, the gray-scarred apex that a frightened old overseer had dropped a worthless debt-conscript into a pit to be killed by, and that had looked at the small, warm, terrified creature keeping its hands where he could see them and talking low and easy and going nowhere, and had made, in that first black night at the bottom of the world, the only choice that had ever really mattered on that moon or maybe anywhere. The choice to guard instead of to kill, to keep company instead of to be used. To answer a kind word at long and unimaginable last, with a kindness of its own. They made him water in the 3rd year. That was the thing Sam was proudest of all the things Deepwater built, prouder than the hydroponics or the council or the trade that kept them fed. Because it was the one thing the settlement did purely out of love, for no profit and no need, for an animal. It was Callum's idea, half-grown and stubborn, and it caught, and once it caught nobody could stop it. There was a worked-out gallery on the low levels, deep and wide, near the reclaim runs, and over one long season the people of Deepwater sealed it and flooded it, clean cold water pumped up from the moon's dark aquifer, 40 feet deep and black as the far sea and cold as the ice. A piece of the deep water brought up into the heart of the mountain, so that the beast that had carried a man through the drains and then chosen in the open, not to go home, so that Duke would not have to go home. Because home would be here, because they would build it for him. Sam brought him down to it the first time himself, not knowing if the beast would understand, and Duke had stood at the black edge of that flooded gallery and gone very still, his nostrils working, reading the cold and the depth and the dark of it, reading the deep water, and then he had looked at Sam one long look, the good amber eye, and then he had poured himself off the edge into the black with barely a splash, the way he had off the sump grate the night of the escape, a thing made for exactly this. And he had swum. He had swum in slow, enormous circles in the cold black deep, rolling, sounding, coming up and going down, moving through the water the way he had never once been able to move on the stiff dry land. An old scarred gray apex made young again, made itself again, made free. And Sam had sat down on the cold edge of the pool and watched him and not been ashamed of his face. After that it was where they went, every day the years allowed it. The man at the black edge and the beast in the deep water, and often the boy, and then the young man Callum became, and often others. Because Deepwater learned that the pool was where Sam did his best thinking and settled his hardest business. And the sight of the two of them there, the ordinary human and the impossible beast, became the settled heart of the place, the thing that told every frightened new arrival more than any speech could that they had come somewhere the old rules did not reach. And there were always frightened new arrivals. That was the work that outlasted all the rest of it, the work Sam never finished and never wanted to, the reason the story kept mattering long after the syndicate had forgotten the moon existed. They came off the failing operations and the broken colonies and the ship-breaking lanes, people and animals both, the sectors discarded and collared and worked down, drawn across the dark by a rumor that had become, out on the frontier, something close to a faith, that there was a gray moon called Deepwater where nobody was disposable, where the collars came off, where a soft-spoken human and his pack kept a door open that the whole rest of the galaxy kept trying to close. The last one Sam ever brought in himself came in the autumn of his years, when his hair had gone gray as Duke's hide, and his own joints had learned the stiffness the beast had carried up the stairs that first free morning. A trader brought her, a young thing human, off a debt colony 2 systems core ward that had gone the way of Blacklung Reach before it was Deepwater, a girl of maybe 19 who had been a conscript her whole short life, and had the flat dead eyes of it, the eyes Sam remembered from the holding cages, the eyes of a creature that has never once been told it was worth keeping. And she was terrified of the pack, of course she was. She had been raised on the syndicate's fear, and here was a ring of apexes flowing around the settlement's old gray-haired human, and she pressed her back to the concourse wall when they came near and could not make her hands stop shaking, and the trader who'd brought her looked helpless, and the young ones of Deepwater who'd never known the pit did not quite know what to do with a fear that raw. Sam did. He crossed the concourse to her, slow, the way you cross to a spooked animal in a barn that's on fire, and he sat down on the floor a careful arm's length from her, an old man lowering himself down onto the cold stone with a grunt, and he did not touch her, and he did not tell her she was safe, because he remembered that being told you were safe by someone who held all the power was the emptiest sound in the universe. He just sat, near her, at her level, with his empty hands where she could see them, and he let the old gray beast come up slow behind him and lie down at his back the way it always had, and he waited until the shaking in the girl had come down enough to hear. "They tell you what this place is?" he asked her, low, easy, on the way in. She shook her head a fraction. Her eyes were on the beast. "That's Duke," Sam said. "He was a weapon once, same as those others. The people who owned this rock before us, they collared him and starved him and threw folks in a pit with him to be killed because they wanted everybody underneath them to believe nothing here could ever win." He kept his voice going, low and level, saying it to her but saying it, really, to 19 years of every conscript who had ever had the worth counted out of them. "I was one of the folks they threw in. Worth 91 labor cycles they had me at, falling. He almost smiled. And I sat down in that pit next to that hurting animal, and I kept my hands where he could see them, and I told him I wasn't going anywhere. That's all. That's the whole thing I did. And he decided he'd rather keep me company than kill me, and everything this place is grew up out of that one night. 11,000 people. That pool down there we made him. All of it. Out of one hurting thing and one worthless thing, in a hole, deciding to be kind to each other when nobody expected either of them to be worth the trouble. The girl looked at him. The dead flat came off her eyes by a fraction, replaced by something younger and more painful, the thing under the flat, the thing the flat had been protecting. That's why you're here, Sam told her. Not because you're safe, I won't insult you. Nothing living's ever all the way safe. You're here because you were never disposable, and somebody finally built a place that knows it. Duke figured out you were worth keeping the second the door opened. You just watch how he watches you, you'll see. Took me a pit and a night to learn what these animals know cold. He put his old hand flat on the stone between them, not reaching, just offering. The name's Sam. Welcome to Deepwater. Take all the time you need to believe it. And the great gray scarred head lifted off the floor behind him, slow, and came forward past Sam's shoulder. And Duke, old now, his muzzle gone frost gray, his one clear amber eye undimmed, stretched his terrible ruined face toward the shaking girl, and breathed her in, the way he had breathed in a soaked debt-conscript at the bottom of a pit a lifetime ago. And then he pressed his nose, cool and heavy and gentle, into her trembling open hand, and chose her too. The girl made a sound Sam remembered making himself once in the dark, and Sam pretended not to hear it, because he was kind that way, and had taught a whole moon to be. Sam Ray's died old in his bed, in the settlement he had never meant to lead, on a mean gray moon that the free traders' charts had long since stopped calling a syndicate asset, and started calling, simply, Deepwater, a port of call on the far frontier where the collars came off. It was a good death, the kind he had not been expected to be allowed, quiet and warm and surrounded, and the whole of Deepwater came through in the last days, the old ones who remembered the pit and the young ones who only knew the story, and Callum, gray himself by then, held his hand at the end. And Duke was there, of course Duke was there. Older than any of his kind had a right to be, kept alive past all reckoning by the deep water and the care, and the whole settlement believed, by a plain refusal to leave the one creature that had ever taken his pain away. The great gray beast lay along the side of the bed with his scarred head on the blankets, and Sam's hand rested on the place where the collar had been, the way it had rested there 10,000 times, and the last thing the old man did, the very last, was to move his thumb once against that healed gray seam and say the thing he had always said, so low that only the beast could hear it. "Thank you," Sam said. "I never forgot what you gave up. Good dog, best dog on the whole damn moon." The ragged ear swiveled toward the sound of it and held. They buried him out on the black plain where the sky went up forever with nothing over it. In the open cold, he had led 11,000 people up into on the first free morning, and the whole settlement stood the burial, and the pack stood it with them, ranged in a silent half-circle around the grave the way they had once ranged around an ore sled at the bottom of a mine. Duke would not leave the place. That surprised no one. He lay down at the head of the grave in the black rock under the thin far sun, and he stayed, the way an ugly gray working dog had once stayed in a yard and would not move, the way the beast himself had stayed on a cold plain with the whole free dark before him, and the people of Deepwater brought him water there, and sat with him, and did not try to make him come away, because they had learned from the man in the grave that you do not use a creature and you do not command a creature. You keep it company. And let it choose. He did not last long after. The old ones said he did not want to, and the old ones were probably right. And when it was his time they buried him there beside the man, out in the open where the sky had no ceiling and the ground had no rail, and the water ran deep and cold and free in the dark under everything, the beast and the human side by side on the far gray edge of nowhere, the hurting thing and the worthless thing, the two the whole galaxy had counted as disposable, who had sat down together in a hole at the bottom of the world one black night, and expecting nothing, been kind. And in the being kind had beaten an empire without ever once raising a hand to it. The story outlived them both, the way the true ones do. It went out on the traders' ships and up the ship-breaking lanes and across the failing colonies, changing shape, growing, mostly true. The tale of the human they threw into the beast pit to die, and the unstoppable predator that looked at him, and chose, against every model and every certainty and 200 years of a fear that had never once been beaten, to guard him instead. And wherever it landed, on whatever mean rock, in whatever collared and counted and disposable heart, it did the one thing a true story does. It made somebody, somewhere, put their hands where a hurting creature could see them and sit down and stay.